I am a great believer that this House should be informed first. I was unaware of any precedent of a statement being made on a day set aside for taking the oath, and therefore unaware that your generosity would have allowed such a statement to be made. I would point out to the House that in my membership of the House, a statement has not been made by the government during the taking of the oath days set aside, nor was any statement made in 1952 on the last occasion when the oath was taken. So I apologise to Mr. Speaker.
Well, in fairness, what I would say is conversations would help overcome any of these difficulties.
And that's why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, I am very grateful, because I always think it's important that this House gets to know and that your generosity in setting a precedent where statements can be made on the days set aside for taking the oath is, I think, a good one. But it is vital that businesses have the support they need to pay their energy bills this winter. His Majesty's Government is determined to grow the economy. We cannot do that if business becomes insolvent thanks to what is tantamount to blackmail by a malevolent state actor. His Majesty's Government announced yesterday that it will be providing a discount on wholesale gas and electricity prices for all non-domestic customers whose current gas and electricity prices have been significantly inflated by global energy prices. This includes all UK businesses and covers the voluntary sector, such as charities, and the public sector, such as schools and hospitals. The scheme will apply to fixed contracts that have been agreed on or after the 1st of April 2022, as well as to deemed variable and flexible tariffs and contracts. It will be applied to energy usage for 6 months from the 1st of October until the 31st of March next year. As with the energy price guarantee for domestic customers, in order to benefit from the scheme, customers do not need to take action. The discount will automatically be applied to their energy bills from the 1st of October. In terms of real-world savings, non-domestic users will start to see the benefits of the scheme in their October energy bills, which are typically received in November. The level of price reduction for each business will vary depending on their contract type, the tariff and the volume used. We will publish a review into the operation of the scheme in 3 months to inform decisions on future support after March 2023. The review will focus in particular on identifying the most vulnerable non-domestic customers and how the government will continue assisting them with energy costs beyond the initial 6-month period. A parallel scheme based on the same criteria and offering comparable support but recognising the different market fundamentals will be established in Northern Ireland. Those who are not connected to either the gas or electricity grid, equivalent support will be provided for non-domestic consumers who use heating oil or alternative fuels instead of gas. Further detail on this will be announced shortly.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the new ministerial team to their posts? The energy crisis poses a severe challenge to businesses of every size, many of whom have been desperate for clarity and reassurance, whilst the Conservative Party spent much of the summer distracted by their own internal drama. On this side of the House, we spent that time arguing that the crisis demands a response that is commensurate with the scale of the challenge, paid for by a windfall tax on the excess profits that have accrued due to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And while I welcome the government's Damascene conversion to freeze energy prices, we must all acknowledge for too many companies this news will already have come too late to save them. Businesses cannot plan on speculation and briefings, and it is regrettable that a minister who respects the role of Parliament chose to avoid parliamentary scrutiny and instead opted for a sparse press release and a short media interview. That is why we have tabled this question, to get the much-needed clarity on these plans that businesses desperately need. So can I ask him, what specifically will the review after 3 months be looking at? And what will the criteria be to determine whether to extend this support or not? Secondly, how will the taxpayer be protected from energy traders inflating prices, knowing the government will be picking up a substantial slice of those costs, come what may? Thirdly, what support will he be offering businesses in the long term to protect themselves from rising energy costs through efficiency measures and the transition to renewable energy? Can I also ask him to address the elephant in the room? Who's paying for this? The government says it cannot cost this package, but it's clearly expensive. This government says it can cut taxes, increase spending, increase borrowing and magically pay for that through higher growth that after 12 years in office has completely eluded them. This, Mr. Speaker, is fantasy economics and is a threat to British businesses and the financial stability of this country. So what can the Secretary of State say to reassure the country these plans are robust, responsible and fair, as well as sufficient to get us through the crisis and better protect businesses in the long term?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although we have been away for a few months and had a leadership election, the socialist record doesn't change. Tax, tax, tax and tax again. It is always the answer to every problem. So let me come to the specifics of the honourable gentleman's question. The 3-month review is taking place to work out who will need support to ensure that support is properly targeted. What is being done at the moment is an immediate response to an extreme crisis to benefit everybody, but not everybody necessarily needs the same level of support. But what we will do in the review is work out who needs the support. And if I can give some early indications, it seems to me that places like care homes are likely to need longer-term support, but that will be covered by the review. He raises the important question about how taxpayers will be protected. I have asked the Public Sector Fraud Authority to look at all our plans to ensure that whatever we are doing and our mechanisms for paying are as robust as they can be against the speed with which we need to act. It is really important to safeguard taxpayers' money. We are doing a number of things to help in the futures market so that the Bank of England and the Treasury are going to provide some underlying capital for the futures market so that there is a more reliable futures price rather than one set on very low liquidity at the moment, and we will legislate on an expedited fashion to ensure that anybody who commits fraud against this is protected against. The honourable gentleman raises the issue of transition. Gas is a transition fuel. The government's commitment to net zero remains, but we will need gas to heat people's boilers for the immediate future, and we need to get that as cheaply as we possibly can, using all our domestic resources. Beyond that, there are exciting plans for carbon capture and storage and for hydrogen, which I think present a very attractive future for this country. The honourable gentleman asks that this scheme should be responsible, robust and fair. It is all. It is responsible to protect business, it is robust to ensure that it can be rolled out quickly, and it is fair to our economy as a whole.
Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's package. It's already having an effect in North Yorkshire. Angus Fire in the small town of Bentham have emailed this morning to thank him for this rapid intervention. But could I ask him, for rural areas like North Yorkshire, on the issue of off-grid, how quickly will businesses hear of the government's intervention for those customers?
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for his support, and I'm glad that businesses in his constituency are being helped already. I recognise the importance of giving support to those who are off-grid, those who are on fuel oil. It's actually particularly an issue in Northern Ireland, of which he has particular experience as a former Secretary of State. What we are looking at is the comparables, because the heating oil price has not risen as much as the gas price, and we need to be fair to all users, and we are working on that currently.
MP spokesperson Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And isn't it great to see the Secretary of State in this House rather than standing in the street filming a statement to the public surrounded by boarded-up shops and rubbish? What an unedifying spectacle for a man who believes in the preeminence of this here Parliament. But I'm glad he's here, because he's got some questions to answer, and it's about time that he did so. So how much does he estimate that this scheme will ultimately cost, including, of course, perhaps interest payments? Can he confirm that the likes of Amazon will benefit from this scheme, a scheme that's going to be built on the back of public sector borrowing? And perhaps most importantly, can he explain to energy users in Scotland, energy-rich Scotland, where we produce more oil and gas than we can possibly consume, and where our electricity generation is made up from just 14.4% gas, why Westminster has failed us so terribly badly?
Mr. Speaker, what was it P.G. Woodhouse said about it being not too difficult to discern the difference between a Scotsman with a grievance and a ray of sunshine? As so often the SNP comes here on Thursday mornings with a grievance, and it's rather like old times, isn't it, Mr. Speaker, when I would have an hour on Thursday mornings to discourse with the Scottish nationalists about their general grumpiness, and I see that is one of the constants of British politics. He refers to rubbish in the streets of Westminster, and I would point out to him that as soon as an administration turns from Conservative to Socialist, the rubbish piles up in the streets, as I think it's also been doing with the SNP in Edinburgh. But this scheme is fair to taxpayers, will give support across the country, and as I said, we are having a review in 3 months to ensure that the support goes to those people who need it most.
Parliamentary Croft.
Can I thank my honourable friend for the discussions he and I have already had on steel? He clearly understands the industry incredibly well, and I'm very grateful to him. Can he confirm that energy-intensive industries will be at the forefront of government's mind when we do reach that point of review?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, indeed. We are having meetings with British Steel, who will be beneficiaries of this scheme. It is really important that we don't burden business in this country in a way that it is not burdened overseas. We must support great British businesses.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the honourable member's question about steel, the energy-intensive industries require co-investment and partnership with government in order to make the transition to cleaner, greener ways of making steel. Can the Business Secretary confirm that he's committed to co-investing with Tata Steel and our other steel makers to make that transition? And will he agree to meet with the all-party parliamentary group on steel that I'm proud to chair in order to set out the government's plans for this vitally important foundation industry?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I'm in agreement with what he says. We are in discussions, my officials are in discussions with Tata Steel. I would be happy to meet him at any time, and I will make this offer to all honourable and right honourable members. I think it is proper that Secretaries of State make themselves available to all reasonable requests for meetings from honourable and right honourable members across the House.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, can I press my right honourable friend on the position of off-grid consumers? Around 40% of constituents in my constituency are off the gas grid, as indeed a similar number are in the Prime Minister's constituency, so this is very important. In the fact sheet updated yesterday, it suggested only £100 was going to be provided to such consumers, which doesn't seem like it delivers a comparable level of support. Can you update us when we're going to have more information? Secondly, do the electricity companies have an accurate database of exactly which customers are on the gas grid and which ones are not, so they're able to make those payments?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the second point, people either have a gas meter or they don't, so that's relatively straightforward. As regards the first point, the price of heating oil has not risen by as much as the price of gas, and therefore the aim of government policy is to ensure equivalence, and therefore inevitably the support given for those on heating oil will be a lower actual amount than those connected to the gas grid, but that will give them equivalence.
Your man's.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. An aspect of this which hasn't really been talked about is the gas and energy consultancy companies. And in my constituency of Gateshead, we've got a higher than average proportion of energy consultancy companies based in the constituency and in the wider North East region. And the impact of the energy crisis is being felt really hard there. Hundreds of energy consultants' jobs have been lost in the last month alone in Gateshead, leading to an exodus of expertise and innovation that will further harm business in the future. Now, the government's announcement to cap energy prices for the next 6 months does nothing to promote the market competition between suppliers and leaves brokerage and consultancy companies sidelined. So, however, businesses will ultimately need to return to the market to improve energy contracts if they are to survive throughout 2023, unless, of course, the government intends to change the market model. So what plans does the government have to repair the energy market in 2023 and, importantly, in the meantime to actually support those businesses in the North East, or is it going to be more devil take the hindmost?
Order. The honourable gentleman's got to learn to ask a question, not make his own statement.
I wonder if the honourable gentleman might want to apply to the Backbench Business Committee for a debate on this subject. But what I would say to him is that the reason we are going for a cap on the wholesale price is so that the market should remain as open as possible, and therefore there should be opportunities for discussions with companies as to what the right level of price is at the retail level, and all that goes between the wholesale to the retail level for the non-domestic sector. So I hope that's actually helpful to the honourable gentleman. Right.
Can I ask a stake for a point of clarification on park homeowners in Winchester, who obviously live under one business owner, the park homeowner, and also people who live in homes of multiple occupation under one business owner. They were left wondering for a long time about the £400 rebate previously announced by the government. Where do they stand in respect of this new energy price guarantee? Are they being treated as businesses? Because if so, they're being treated as business units, not domestic units, which of course they are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend. It's an important question and something constituents of all of ours will be concerned about. We will legislate to ensure that the cut in prices is fed through to residents. So therefore people running park homes or running mansion blocks will have to pass on the benefit. That will be a legal requirement. As we look to the review, I think it is very straightforward to assume that park homes and mansion blocks will be at the forefront of those who need continued support because they are residential rather than business users.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orkney and Shetland already have the highest levels of fuel poverty in the country. We have no access at all to mains gas grids, so many more of my constituents rely on heating oil. My constituents are being quoted this morning £1.22 per litre for heating oil. It is pretty clear that the market in heating oil has failed. Why is the government not acting now to bring heating oil within the price cap mechanism?
The right honourable gentleman says the government isn't acting now, which isn't entirely accurate. The government is acting now to include heating oil. As I said, heating oil hasn't risen as much as gas. Obviously, we are working on the basis of the evidence that is available, and we are looking at the heating oil price.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome this statement. Across my Colne Valley constituency, I have many small businesses like play gyms, gyms, cafes in former textile mills. How can we make sure that their landlords, because they pay one fee for everything all in, are passing on the benefit of the programme that he's announced today?
Mr. Speaker, we will legislate so that landlords are obliged to pass on the cut in wholesale prices.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is still a lot of clarity regarding the government's energy support package for non-domestic users. Businesses, faith and voluntary organisations are especially worried in my constituency about the potential cliff edge that will come next April. It is not viable for organisations to plan in 6-month timelines. So there needs to be more clarity and certainty about the scheme. So will the Secretary of State set out what criteria is going to be used for those organisations, who will qualify for further additional support come April next year?
Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what the review will cover, and the review will be published in plenty of time for the 1st of April.
Mr.
Speaker, obviously across the House we welcome this package, and we've seen many similar packages across Europe as a whole. There's been a much further debate there in Europe about how we also constrain demand, particularly on the part of industrial users. We cannot subsidise consumption without actually also on the same time trying to reduce demand. Otherwise we're causing immense risk of blackouts come this winter.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. The price signal remains very strong. Even with this support, prices have risen significantly, and I think it is fair to assume that non-domestic users will be rational actors in the market.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
To prevent households from being locked into years of fuel poverty, Plaid Cymru are urging his government to bring forward a street-by-street insulation programme to be paid for by a higher windfall tax on oil and gas companies. Businesses also need support with energy efficiency measures so that they too can permanently reduce their energy bills. Will he meet with me to discuss the FSB's proposals for help to green vouchers, which will support small and medium-sized businesses to afford energy-saving products and services?
It would be a pleasure to meet the Honourable Lady and to discuss matters that she would like to raise. The Government is committed to helping people with insulation projects. That's an important part of the Government's strategy, and she is right to raise it.
Miriam Kate.
Mr Speaker, this support will be very much welcomed by businesses in my constituency of Penistone and Stocksbridge, particularly high energy users like steel. But the steel industry has suffered from uncompetitive energy prices for years. So as welcome as this short-term help is, can my right honourable friend confirm that he is looking at a long-term strategy for steel to make sure that our UK manufacturers can compete in the long term?
Oh, Mr Speaker, I'm in entire agreement with my honourable friend. It makes absolutely no sense to make British industry uncompetitive against global industry.
Very Sherman.
Mr Speaker, it saddened me to remind the House that we now have a Secretary of State for Business and Industry who's never worked in industry or in business. He's an investment banker. And can I tell him that small firms and big firms in Huddersfield will go bust with the energy levels, cost of energy this winter. And has he seen the front page of the Financial Times? This is a crisis for our country, especially in manufacturing. When will he do something? Wake up to his responsibility. Get out there in the country and talk to manufacturers.
Mr Speaker, I think it's the honourable gentleman who needs to wake up and pay attention to what has been announced.
Tomlinson.
Speaker, for many businesses, including Jungle Kingdom in my constituency, solar panels are a way to make a significant tangible difference in the long term, but they cannot secure the permission of their landlord. What measures could be considered to make it work for both parties?
My honourable friend raises an important point, that landlords and tenants need to work together to try and ensure that efficient sources of energy are achieved. Normally it will be in the interests of landlords to have solar panels applied, particularly if the tenant is volunteering to pay for them. So I think this is something where the market can probably find an answer.
Smith.
Speaker, many small businesses in the Lune Valley and over Wyresdale in my constituency use heating oil, and whilst the price of this has not increased as much or as fast as the gas price, it has still increased exponentially, and many small businesses are really struggling to know how they're going to make ends meet. So can I ask the Secretary of State, how soon will these businesses get any clarification whatsoever from this government about whether or not they're going to still be in business at Christmas?
Mr Speaker, the heating oil issue is an important one for her constituents, for businesses, and as I mentioned earlier, for Northern Ireland. It is therefore important that we make sure there is a proper equivalent scheme, and that's what we're doing.
Brereton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Many businesses in my constituency welcome very much these measures, and as a number of members have already said, energy-intensive industries particularly have been at the brunt of many of the issues that we've faced with energy cost rises. So will my right honourable friend look at particularly industries like ceramics, look at that longer-term support, and particularly look at how we can support those industries to invest in more efficient and energy-saving technologies?
Yes, this is a very important point for the ceramics industry, for the steel industry, and for other high-energy intensive industries, that they want to move to more efficient means of production, and this may require some investment, and it's important that the government helps work on schemes to ensure that we have vibrant, efficient, profitable, and most importantly of all, globally competitive industries.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State's announcements may have finally put a temporary brake on further terrifying price hikes, but it leaves huge questions unanswered, including what is the government's exit strategy? We need a proper solution to get us out of this crisis by reducing dependence on gas and upgrading buildings for the long term. Just yesterday, over 100 top businesses wrote to the government begging them for support for energy efficiency and large-scale industrial
industrial decarbonisation. Can he explain why they were so conspicuous by their absence in his measures announced today, and will he remedy that now?
Mr. Speaker, the businesses that write can implement their own energy efficiency measures. That's what businesses do. It's a sensible investment for them, because if they become more energy efficient, they will save cash on their energy bills. But I would also say what we need is more secure and cheaper supplies of gas. That's why we're going to issue more licenses. It's why we're looking at shale gas. It is really important that people have confidence that gas will flow through the pipes and into their boilers so that they can heat their homes during this and succeeding winters.
Mark Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a time when they're facing very substantial increases in a key cost of operating, businesses across the UK have welcomed the measures, and particularly the speed with which the government has responded. I wonder whether the Secretary of State saw the remarks of Kate Nichols of Hospitality UK, who praised the inclusiveness of the scheme by bringing in both small and large companies and drawing attention to how this is actually going to secure jobs in the long term.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his question, that it is fundamentally important that we had a rapid scheme that protected as many businesses as possible, because the increase is so extreme that on an immediate view of it, it was hard to see any business that would find conditions easy with this level of increase. And therefore we had to act quickly and universally, and I'm very grateful for his support and for that of the hospitality industry.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Will small charities that are not registered with the Charity Commission be eligible for this assistance? I'm thinking of those with an income of less than £5,000 a year that cannot register voluntarily and are not required to do so. Will they get help as well?
This proposal will help all non-domestic users. The only exception is the gas-powered electricity generation operators who will not get the subsidy for their electricity generation. All other non-domestic outlets will be benefited.
So Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome this package with support to businesses and safeguard jobs in Runnymede and Weybridge. Of course, the current situation is exacerbated by an energy market that doesn't work, and the need for further investment in terms of nuclear and renewables. And I'm glad the government's consulting on the former and investing in the latter. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's public and private investment that's needed, along with a functioning energy market, to ensure we never have to face this situation again?
Yeah.
Yes, my honourable friend's absolutely right. We need a better functioning energy market. There are real difficulties with the liquidity in the futures market at the moment. He's also right that we need a further and faster rollout of nuclear energy, and that is being worked on, and that offshore wind, which is going at a rapid pace, continues to be a major source of energy and a growing source of energy within this country.
Carla Lockhart.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has mentioned Northern Ireland several times throughout the course of the statement, highlighting that he is aware that a large number of small businesses in Northern Ireland rely on oil for heating their premises. Can the Secretary of State go further than just a throwaway line and confirm that the inadequate and insignificant £100 being offered to households for oil will be reviewed, and that the same figure will not be offered to businesses reliant on oil?
Mr. Speaker, 2/3 of Northern Ireland households are not on gas, and therefore it is fundamental to ensure that Northern Ireland is treated fairly and as a full part as it is of the United Kingdom. That is an absolute priority for the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland does not have the price cap that applies in Great Britain, and therefore we will need to bring forward legislation to deal with the issues in Northern Ireland, which we will do as a matter of absolute priority to ensure that a scheme is up and running rapidly, and we are very conscious, as other members have raised, about the fuel oil issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the heating oil issue, 2/3 of my constituency live off the gas grid. I note what the Secretary of State says about being fair to all bill payers, but I would urge him not to fall into the trap that rural areas are wealthy areas. Fuel poverty in my constituency is a serious problem, and so far the only support that's been announced is £100, which will provide heating oil for just 10 days. It will not touch the sides. Can I urge the government to rethink on rural areas and heating oil?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and representing a rural constituency, personally, I am well aware that there are areas of our countryside that suffer from fuel poverty. I would say to my honourable friend that it is all a matter of proportionality. That is what we are striking to achieve, and to get that balance right.
Aldi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A businessman contacted my office recently, extremely distressed, concerned about the future of his business. He does engineering, and he was talking about closing his doors for good and laying off 50 people. So I hope the Minister accepts that not only has the delay in hearing something from government caused emotional distress, but also an impact on the local economy, because businesses are not making future decisions for investment in workforce or in their business when they're not sure that they have a future. So bearing that in mind, will the Minister offer that greater reassurance by giving businesses long-term support to improve their energy efficiency?
A very significant package of support has been announced, and it's been brought forward as early as was practicable. I've mentioned that a review will take place, and the point of the review is to work out who is going to be in most need of that support.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, I very much welcome this package of support for business, like I did for domestic users. I was contacted yesterday, however, by a resident of Orwell Quay, and they've said they've experienced a 300% increase in the service charge to heat the communal areas. My constituent Alan wanted to know whether the government has a plan to support leaseholders in places such as Orwell Quay and Ipswich.
Mr. Speaker, we will legislate to ensure that the reduction in the wholesale cost is fed through to people who are in mansion blocks or for whom the energy is being bought centrally and then charged on a service charge. It is going to be a fundamental part of these proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Calder Millerfield in my constituency have been quoted a 345% increase in their electricity costs alone. While I appreciate what his plans may be to help them in the next 6 months, what can he offer them after the end of that 6 months? Because 345% increase in just electricity costs could put this business under.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises the point that I think was concerning MPs across the House of these extraordinary large rises, and that's why we've brought forward this package. I'm trying to give as much reassurance as I can without preempting the review. As I said, we have done this on a completely broad brush basis because at the moment that is the right thing to do. It is needed urgently. However, we do need to examine exactly who ought to benefit in a review and then have that announced in plenty of time for the 1st of April to see what level of support is needed for the longer term.
Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many businesses in East Devon have already welcomed the support outlined by my right honourable friend, but as he well knows, the hospitality industry in particular will need targeted support after that 6-month period. Will he commit to continue to work with the industry and the all-party parliamentary group of which I chair on a wider package that will help pubs and cafes survive after 6 months?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to consider representations to the review from my honourable friend and from others regarding specific industries.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The trouble with announcing a measure which only lasts for 6 months is that local authorities are quite responsibly putting together their budgets for next year now. My local authority has said to me that if this is not renewed for next year, because they run swimming pools and leisure centres and care homes and schools and so on, it will be the single biggest blow to their finances in 50 years, and they would have to start laying people off pretty sharp. So will the Secretary of State make sure that local authorities are given plenty of advance notice on how their budgets can be protected for the next financial year?
Mr. Speaker, I've laid out when the review will be and that we will give as much notice as we can prior to the 1st of April.
Aaron Bell.
Mr. Speaker, could I thank my right honourable friend for his statement, which I know will be welcomed across Newcastle under Lyme, both in our hospitality industry but also the brickworks at Chesterton, which is energy intensive. Does he agree with me that we must not be in this position again in future? Indeed, Western Europe must not be in this position again, and that will require investment not only in diversifying our energy but also in storage. And what will his department do to work on energy storage?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right. We must not be in this position again. That is why we want to ensure that we maximise our own domestic sources of energy and we look at long-term contracts with friendly nations across the world who are fundamentally more reliable. But yes, there is a great deal more to do, and storage is something that we are looking at.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Scottish Licensed Trade Association have said of the Government's plans, when you look beyond the headlines, it doesn't live up to the hype, as this new scheme caps the wholesale price and pubs and clubs could be paying 200 to 300% higher bills than normal. The newly and extensively restored Foundry pub in Inverness has had to close its doors a few weeks ago, citing energy costs as a key reason during the Tory leadership vacuum. Does the Secretary of State accept that what he is offering businesses is too little, too late and doesn't last long enough?
No, I wouldn't characterise it that way at all. I'd simply say that if Scotland were independent, it wouldn't be able to afford to do any of this.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Anglesey is known as Energy Island. We have wind, wave, solar, hydrogen and hopefully new nuclear at Wilbur. And yet we have one of the lowest GVAs of any constituency across the UK. Can my right honourable friend reassure my constituents that this package will help protect their jobs, but help bring much needed new employment and investment and skilled jobs to Anglesey?
Mr Speaker, that is something I would be extremely keen to see happen. Now, I would also add that Innismon has a very high-energy dynamo as a Member of Parliament.
Clive Betts.
I just want to follow up the question raised previously by my honourable friend about local authorities' position. Come December, the Secretary of State for DLUHC will make a spending announcement about local authorities for next year. Would the Secretary of State agree that his review of energy costs should be incorporated into that, so local authorities get one presentation of what the future is going to look like, rather than a myriad of different ones not joined up together?
Mr Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman is rather looking a gift horse in the mouth, that this is providing a very significant reduction in energy prices for the next 6 months, and a review will take place to see what happens next. Local authorities would be in a very difficult financial situation if this were not being done, but the government cannot responsibly commit to unended expenditure. It has to be done in a sensible and prudent fashion.
Speaker, I warmly welcome the package of measures my right honourable friend has set out, but as the number of questions this morning has indicated, the one area that does need more detail and, dare I say it, polish is the off-grid question. So can I urge my right honourable friend, when he looks to the detail of off-grid support for businesses and households, he doesn't treat it just as one, but looks at the disparity in pricing between oil and LPG, which are very different cost bases and need to be treated separately?
Indeed, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is right. LPG has not risen as much as natural gas. And heating oil has not risen as much as natural gas either, but it is important to make sure that there is fairness for everybody. And bear in mind, some houses and indeed some schools are still dependent on coal for their heating.
Manera Wilson.
Very much, Mr Speaker. Yesterday's announcement provided very little certainty for schools and other public services. It simply pushed the cliff edge back by 6 months. Schools in my constituency are already facing difficult decisions about cutting support staff, for instance, but they also need help cutting energy usage. And this government shut down the school's energy efficiency loan scheme, which helps them to buy insulation and solar panels and so on. So isn't it high time the Secretary of State looked at reopening that scheme?
Mr Speaker, I'd say on the first point that we are providing considerably more certainty than would otherwise be provided in a fundamentally uncertain energy market price. We obviously encourage people to look at ways in which they can insulate themselves better and are in endless discussions to ensure that we can have the appropriate programmes.
Davies.
Businesses across Grantham and Stamford will welcome the support announced this week. Lincolnshire's farmers, in particular, are facing increasing pressure owing to the rise of costs of inputs like fertiliser and energy. So will he assure me that he will remain mindful of the particular circumstances farmers face in the design of any future support packages?
Mr Speaker, as I also represent an agricultural constituency, I am very conscious of the needs of farmers, which should be at the forefront of the nation's care and concern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In times of crisis, we turn to our civil society organisations to support us with vital services. And across the arts now, we're expecting museums, galleries and theatres to provide the public with warm baths. These critical community and cultural organisations tell me they are facing combined challenges: falling donations and incomes, rising costs and the continuing impact of COVID. So can the Business Secretary tell us, what can he tell us to reassure these essential organisations that support for energy costs will extend for them beyond 6 months?
Mr. Speaker, I think I've already answered the question in relation to what happens after 6 months. There will be a review, and what is going to happen will be announced well in advance of the 1st of April.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this statement from the Secretary of State on behalf of the thousands of businesses, charities, but also the 63 care homes and 30 schools in Southend West. But when he comes to his review, would the Secretary of State assure me that he will keep in mind the particular needs of special schools, of which we have brilliant ones in Southend, Kingstown in particular? They look after the most seriously disabled children. Their energy needs are much higher due to the feeding pumps and the hoists. Would he agree to sit down with me and discuss their special needs when he comes to his review?
I would be delighted to discuss this with my honourable friend, and in my own constituency we have the Fossway School as a special school which provides a wonderful and caring service to children in very great need.
Kim Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has mentioned that there will be support for the voluntary and charitable status. In my Liverpool Riverside constituency, we have a number of food banks and food pantries, and they're struggling to keep their doors open and they're providing essential services for people forced into poverty. So can the Secretary of State tell us what level of support beyond the 6 months will be available to this very important sector? Thank you.
So, Mr. Speaker, I have already answered several times the question on what will happen after the 1st of April.
Businesses in Hinckley and Bosworth, we're hugely grateful for the protection the government's put in place. There is one problem, though, with world events. What is the government's assessment of the risk of energy blackouts, and should businesses prepare for energy blackouts?
Mr. Speaker, there is a requirement for a study of that to be provided, and I believe a study will be provided in early October in relation to our energy security through the winter.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parts of Blaenau Gwent are 1,200 feet above sea level, and our winters can be bitter. So, will there be any extra help for families facing higher bills in constituencies with much colder weather than most? And also, will the government look again at the cold weather payment criteria as part of its upcoming review?
Mr. Speaker, cold weather payments is not a responsibility of my department, but I will ensure that his comments are passed on to the relevant Secretary of State.
Mr.
Speaker, like many other MPs, I spent the summer visiting small businesses and charities in my constituency, and what they all say is that they need to be able to make forward plans. For example, Foursquare, a charity in my constituency, run a hostel for homeless young people, a women's refuge, and they also fundraise from a large retail premises. And these soaring energy bills may affect their ability to keep the homeless hostel and the women's refuge open. And the fact is, it's simply not practical for them to wait 3 months for a review. They need action and information on the government's long-term plans before 3 months are up. So will the Secretary of State please seriously reconsider the timing here and listen to voices across the House urging him to do that?
Mr. Speaker, we have acted extremely swiftly to provide support. It is proper that this should be reviewed to ensure it goes to the right people. The timeline is completely reasonable, and it really does seem to me, Mr. Speaker, that people are looking for things, for a package that they broadly welcome, to harp on about.
Speaker, many businesses are negotiating contracts now with their energy suppliers. So what has he got to say to those businesses? Should they just negotiate just for 6 months? What is he going to do in all urgency to prevent this next 6 months just being a period when businesses run down to closing in 6 months' time?
Mr. Speaker, as I've set out, there will be a review and there will be an announcement giving people plenty of time for the 1st of April.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many churches and charities are going to be expending more energy over the coming months because they're providing warm banks in the constituency. So what additional support will they be able to apply for to be able to provide the resilience our communities need?
Mr. Speaker, this support is comprehensive across the non-domestic sector.
Ian Paisley.
Speaker, the Secretary has indicated the clarity that many companies now require in Northern Ireland
that legislation will now be required to assist businesses. That thousands of businesses in Northern Ireland are small and medium-sized enterprises. They actually can't wait now for legislation. So I'm wondering if the Secretary can now commit to an emergency instrument or provision before December of this year.
Mr. Speaker, this House, when called upon, can act remarkably swiftly. The intention is that we should introduce legislation in October and pass it by the end of October, and that it should take effect from the 1st of October to ensure that businesses in the whole of the United Kingdom, or non-domestic users in the whole of the United Kingdom, are helped, but that everybody in Northern Ireland should be helped as well. That is the broad time frame, and I hope that the House will cooperate with that timetable, because obviously that is necessary for expedited legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen so many big energy companies post obscene profits, while constituents, businesses, charities, schools across my Vauxhall constituency continue to suffer. Since the government was so reluctant to introduce the windfall tax, can the Minister please confirm how the government will ensure that the energy companies will be compelled to pass on this subsidy to their businesses?
Mr. Speaker, it of course depends what you mean by the energy companies, because the domestic suppliers have not been making enormous amounts of money, and indeed many of the energy suppliers went out of business over the last few months, so they haven't been making vast amounts of money. Some businesses have been making a lot of money. They pay very significant amounts of tax already, and it is really important that we don't assume there is some honeypot of businesses that can be raided. There isn't. We need long-term investment in this country to maximise the exploration and production of oil and gas to ensure that we have lower prices and sustainable businesses. That is not aided by putting taxes on at every opportunity, which the Socialists always want to do.
The domestic scheme is based on a loan to be repaid out of future bills. If the business scheme is to be repaid in the same way, why would businesses not regard this as a tax rise deferred? And if it's not, is the Business Secretary really expecting it to be repaid out of general taxation by the rest of the taxpayers? Tax, tax, tax is what he said.
Economic growth, economic growth, economic growth.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. Can I again raise the plight of the hospitality sector? The Secretary of State will know they've been through a tumultuous time through the pandemic, and many small hospitality outlets are facing extortionate increases in their bills. Howard's Neighbourhood Bar, a small 60-seat bar in Denton, is facing their bills increasing by £2,000 a month. Wow. That is just not sustainable for them. Whilst this support takes them 6 months down the road, they will be worried about what happens then. I know the Secretary of State says there will be a review, but can he offer a glimmer of hope to businesses like Howard's Neighbourhood Bar that they won't face that cliff edge in 6 months' time?
So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable gentleman asks a very fair question. I cannot preempt the review, but I think I can offer a glimmer of hope. Because what we have to do in the review is see those companies that need the greatest support and other non-domestic users. I've indicated some of them. It seems to me, without going too far, that the hospitality sector is one that is at particular risk in this area. If he would like to make representations to the review, I will listen to them very carefully.
Lyndon.
As well as businesses, a number of housing associations have concerns about energy prices. In my small Glasgow's constituency, I've got over 15 housing associations, many of which have the unique tenement-style properties, which are very difficult when it comes to energy efficiency. Would the Secretary of State be willing to come to Glasgow East and take part in a round table with local housing associations and understand the challenges that tenement properties in particular face during the energy crisis?
The honourable gentleman now so often raises a serious point, that we are very conscious of the issues facing social housing landlords, particularly that those which have some rather older housing stock that are the least energy efficient. And there are important things to be done in helping them make their housing more efficient, and there have been schemes available to do that. I'm not sure I can promise a visit, but I'd be delighted to discuss this with him further.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Care homes in my constituency are facing soaring energy costs, I'm sure the Minister will be aware, and they look after frail and vulnerable people, and it's essential that they're kept warm. I note the Minister's comments thus far on care homes, but can he give us an assurance that there will be a real focus on ensuring their ongoing financial viability?
Mr Speaker, this is obviously a fundamental concern to His Majesty's Government.
Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I want to try again on local authorities, because I'm not sure the Minister understands that the review is simply too late. Too many councils already are facing budget holds. Luton Council £10 million budget hold this year because of increasing energy costs, inflationary pressures and increasing demands. So has the Minister had any conversations with the Secretary of State for Local Government, DLUC, about the budget planning process? Because local authorities are required to produce medium-term budgets before April next year.
Mr Speaker, the degree of certainty that is being offered is greater than there is in a normal year. We are saying that what will happen will be announced after the 3-month review has taken place in plenty of time for the 1st of April. Normally, local authorities are dependent on the vicissitudes of the market.
Patrick Grady.
Butchers and other small businesses that I've spoken to in Glasgow North are already operating on the tightest of margins, and if they go out of business, that has a knock-on effect across the local economy. So the poverty rate spirals up rather than wealth trickling down. So what assurances can he give to these businesses rather than simply pushing the cliff edge further down the road?
Mr Speaker, I think we've given a very substantial assurance this morning.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In recess, I met with residents at Winlayton at the Winton Court Sheltered Housing Scheme run by Housing 21. And they explained to me how angry they were that they were not benefiting from the domestic subsidy. So can the Secretary of State tell me how he proposes to make sure that those people, most of them pensioners, are not hit by increased energy costs, are in no worse position than other residents?
So I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, who is such an assiduous campaigner for her constituents. And she's absolutely right that we have to ensure that these wholesale price cuts do feed through to the people that they're meant to benefit, and that will be in our legislation.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Because of the government's failure to act quickly on energy costs, Smithy's Fish and Chip Shop, which had been trading for 38 years on Beverley Road in Hull, had to close its doors. Not just because of energy cost increases, but the price of fish has gone up 120% and the price of beef dripping 150%. So I'd like to know from the Secretary of State what more he's going to do to reassure one of the institutions at the heart of our communities, fish and chip shops.
Mr Speaker, I'm glad to reassure people about fish and chip shops, which the Honourable Lady indeed is right to say are at the heart of our community, because they will benefit from this universal scheme.
Girl Monaghan.
Speaker, businesses in Glasgow North West can literally see the turbines that are producing Scotland's renewable energy. They are not feeling supported at the moment. So can the Secretary of State confirm that the businesses that are being supported most through this crisis are the energy producers, gas and oil companies?
Hear, hear. No, that's a complete misunderstanding of what is happening. What we are happening is all non-domestic users in addition to domestic users. We're protecting businesses and individuals and charities across the country.
Smith.
Lots of SMEs in South Manchester are still really worried. And can I make a particular plea for small and medium-sized bakeries like Martin's and like Barbican in Chorlton, my constituency, have been in touch with me, really concerned. Can he assure us that he's in discussions with those kind of energy-intensive small businesses? And can I just make a plea that that doesn't have to wait for 3 months? I hope those discussions are going on now.
Mr Speaker, all businesses will be benefiting, but obviously the more energy intensive the business, the more it will benefit from this reduction in wholesale prices. And as I've said, I'm very open to receive from honourable and right honourable members representations to the review that is taking place.
And McLaughlin.
Mr Speaker, I'm a member of the voluntary board of the Scottish Pantry Network, and our shops are significantly impacted by the rising energy costs. The Pantry Network exists for environmental reasons to stop food waste, but primarily it exists to provide low-cost fresh food for people who can't afford supermarket prices. To keep the food fresh, our shops have walk-in
fridges and walk-in freezers, and they cost a lot of money to run. Does he not see the situation whereby some of those supermarkets that my constituents can't shop in, making massive profits, will be helped by this, but some of my pantry shops won't be, simply because they signed up to a contract prior to the 1st of April? Will he remove that date? And if not, at the 3-month review, will he at least consider including all of those non-domestics that signed up to contracts before the 1st of April in the review?
Mr. Speaker, the major price rises in contracts took place after the 1st of April, which is why the 1st of April date was set.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the last 12 years, the government has had the chance to act on energy supply and infrastructure. Businesses around the country have been saying to me, manufacturing businesses, that they are facing a 59% premium against the EU average for electricity. So why has the government not acted sooner, certainly before this energy spike, and actually ensured the security of UK businesses?
Mr. Speaker, it is very important for our economy that we have competitive energy prices and that we don't go out of our way to burden British business. I agree that the honourable gentleman is right to be campaigning for lower energy prices.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, the energy package announced today is fine as late as it is and as far as it goes, and the Secretary of State has heard widespread concerns about a cliff edge in this support in 3 or 6 months' time. In view of the concerns raised today, will he give further and urgent consideration to additional support for energy-intensive business sectors such as manufacturing and hospitality, as well as longer-term support for investing in energy-saving measures?
Mr. Speaker, I think we've covered most of that already, and the answer is broadly yes.
Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State admitted a few minutes ago that we've all known for at least 6 months that urgent and major government intervention is going to be needed. Why has it taken so long? And calling back his experience and knowledge of the way things work from his previous post, who does he think this House should demand comes to that dispatch box to apologise to our constituents for 6 months unnecessary delay?
Mr. Speaker, most energy is used during the winter. We've got plans ready for the winter.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr. Speaker, now the Secretary of State acknowledged the importance of farming in response to an earlier question, but we know in terms of food supply it's not just farmers, it's factories and those involved in food production, and that's certainly the case in North East Fife. Further food inflation will only impact struggling families more. So although this short-term energy support is welcome, there are other issues for the sector such as cost of fertiliser, labour supply, etc, etc, etc. Will the government commit to a cross-government strategy involving DEFRA, the Home Office, the Treasury and BEES to ensure that we ensure our food supply for the future?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is right to raise what is going on with the cost of living more generally. Energy is a very important part of that, and helping deal with the energy problem will have an effect on price rises throughout the economy. The Bank of England, I think, is going to be saying something later on today, which is another part of dealing with inflation. But I accept her analysis that inflation is a very difficult problem for an economy to face.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his commitment and his help for all the different sectors across the whole of my community. I met a business on Monday from my community, employs over 200 people. It's a very energy intensive factory business. His figures for his energy in a year are a 6-figure sum on the large side. He needs help right away to secure those jobs and ensure that the future is secure for him and his company. Can I ask again the Secretary of State to clarify, please, will he qualify for that 50% help towards energy costs, in particular for electric?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the circumstances of an individual company, but if the company is on mains gas, it will benefit, and it will benefit from the 1st of October, and electric. It will benefit in Northern Ireland. Both gas and electric will be almost identical, for technical reasons slightly different, but same in effect as what goes on in GB.
We now come to the next urgent question. Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to make a statement regarding the lifting of the moratorium on shale gas extraction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and what a pleasure it is to be continuing on this theme. And indeed, The honourable lady is right to be saying to me that I need to find the right page, because I am having some difficulty in finding the right page immediately. But don't worry. Don't worry.
Secretary of State. Is there another copy we can send through? Have you got it? Order, Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for bringing forward his urgent question. And I'm glad to be able to announce that the moratorium on extraction of shale gas is being lifted, and a statement has been laid before the House to do this. As I was setting out in the previous urgent question, it is important that we use all available sources of fuel within this country. It is more environmentally friendly to use our own sources of fuel rather than to extract them from other countries and transport them here at great cost, both financially and in terms of carbon. It is something, therefore, that we need to revisit, and we need to revisit the seismic limits to ensure that shale gas extraction can be done in an effective and efficient way.
Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a case of the dog ate my homework, and and it's hardly surprising. Let's start by taking his excuse for lifting the fracking ban, Mr. Speaker, that it will make a difference to the energy bills crisis. It won't, because gas is sold on the international market. The current Chancellor said so in February of this year, and I quote, "No amount of shale gas would be enough to lower the European price of gas." Even, Mr. Speaker, the founder of Quadrilla said the Secretary of State is wrong in an article published yesterday. So first, why doesn't he admit the truth? That anyone who knows anything about this subject says his claim that fracking will cut bills is nonsense. Next, let's come to safety. The 2019 manifesto, on which he and every member of the party opposite stood, said this, Mr. Speaker: "We will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely." They are lifting the ban, but they can't supply the evidence. And the British Geological Survey published today certainly doesn't do it. So, in the absence of the evidence, his approach is to change the safety limits. He says in his written statement laid before this House, tolerating a higher degree of risk and disturbance appears to us to be in the national interest. I look forward to him and his colleagues explaining his charter for earthquakes to the people of Lancashire, Yorkshire, the Midlands, Sussex, Dorset, and indeed Somerset, who will be part of his dangerous experiment. Let me tell the party opposite, we will hang this broken promise round their necks in every part of the country between now and the next general election. The Conservative manifesto also said, having listened to local communities, we have ruled out changes to the planning system. Does he stand by that promise? And how will he abide by the Prime Minister's commitment to local consent? The truth is, he doesn't get this, that you can't escape a fossil fuels crisis by doubling down on fossil fuels. Renewables are today 9 times cheaper than gas. The only way to cut energy bills and have energy security is with zero-carbon homegrown power, including onshore wind and solar, which his wing of the Conservative Party hates and he continues to block. For communities in every part of our country, today shows they can never trust a word this government says again. And he has shown he is willing to break his promises to support dangerous fringe ideas that put the interests of fossil fuel companies above that of the British people.
Secretary of State. Mr. Speaker, there was plenty of energy in that, but it was, I'm afraid, more sound and fury that signifieth nothing. We know that shale gas is safe. It's safe in the United States and has been one of the biggest contributors to the decline in carbon emissions in the United States of any activity that has gone on in that country. We know, even if members opposite wish to ignore it, that seismic activity of 2.5 and below on the Richter scale takes place millions of times a year across the world. That our standards for ground level movements for construction work are double those that have ever been achieved by any shale gas exploration in this country. There is a huge margin over what we allow for building work against what has actually happened in terms of shale gas. And the honourable gentleman seeks to deny the ordinary rules of supply and demand. He ought to be aware that when you increase supply and demand remains steady, you have an effect on pricing, and that pricing is always set at the margin, that the price of any commodity is set by the final user who demands that commodity. And if supply exceeds demand, then prices fall, and any increase in supply helps reduce costs. But there's another point. We have, all of us, constituents with gas boilers, and we are going to have them for many years to come. Do we really want them to be dependent on strange dictatorships that wage war in this world? Or do we want to have our own security, our own supplies? Do we want to maximise what we receive from the North Sea and what we receive from underneath our feet? This seems to me, Mr. Speaker, to be just good common sense. It is safe. It is shown to be safe. The scare stories have been disproved time and again. The hysteria about seismic activity, I think, fails to understand that the Richter scale is a logarithmic scale. It seems to think it is a straight arithmetic scale, which of course it is not. And bringing on this supply will bring us cheaper energy, which we need. That will help our constituents. It secures our supply, which will ensure that our businesses can continue to operate whatever the weather. This is of such importance, and it is sheer Ludditry, Mr. Speaker, that opposes it.
Well, Benson. There's nothing Luddite about the people of Lancashire or of Fylde. And I just want to start by saying, Mr. Speaker, how disappointed I am that Parliament was not informed about this before the media, that as a local Member of Parliament I was not given the courtesy, despite having requested for 2 weeks, contacting the honourable member to get information via his PPS. I've sent letters, I've sent WhatsApps, nothing back. So, Mr. Speaker, can we be crystal clear on one thing? The Prime Minister of the Manchester hustings, it's a matter for public record, you can find the clip, made it crystal clear, no ifs, no buts, no caveats, that fracking would only take place in the United Kingdom where there was local consent. Crystal clear. So if the Prime Minister is to remain a woman of her word, a woman that we can believe in, which I believe she is, can the Secretary of State outline how that local consent will be given and demonstrated in my constituency of Fylde?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman would have heard my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in her speech on energy on the 8th of September, saying that we were lifting the moratorium on fracking. So I'm surprised that he feels he wasn't informed, because that has been announced. We obviously want to work with local communities, and it is really important that the companies who seek to extract shale gas come up with packages that make what they're proposing to do welcome to local communities. That is of fundamental importance and is what the Prime Minister has set out.
Stephen Flynn, SNP spokesperson.
Mr. Speaker, there can be no doubt that this particular political earthquake is absolutely bonkers. The UK faces two problems when it comes to energy prices and energy security. Let's be clear, when it comes to energy prices, producing shale gas will make absolutely no difference whatsoever. And when it comes to energy security, what this government could and should be doing is turbocharging renewables and creating a CFD for the likes of hydrogen to ensure that we have hydrogen boilers in the future, not reliant upon gas boilers of the past. But luckily, Mr. Speaker, in Scotland there will be no change, there will be no fracking whatsoever. We, unlike the Tories, stick to our word. And isn't it great to know that that will not change? But the one thing that will change is we'll be long gone from the shackles of this place by the time shale gas is produced in England.
Mr. Speaker, it's amusing to think that the economics of independence were all dependent upon oil and gas, and now they're not going to have any. So that doesn't seem to me to be entirely consistent. Using our national resources is a sensible and wise policy, and that is what this government is looking to do.
So Desmond Swain.
There's been no moratorium on fracking for thermal energy, and it's continued at a pace at many sites.
but the science is the same, isn't it?
Mr. Speaker, except thermal energy has no seismic limit on it, whereas there was a 0.5 limit on shale gas, which made it almost impossible. It was a policy that was designed to stop any shale gas being extracted.
In Lavery.
Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State confirm what recoverable reserves of shale gas we have here in the UK? What percentage of that shale gas would be likely to be the demand, the global demand, or even national demand? Then how will this impact upon the global price of natural gas?
Mr. Speaker, we need to get on with the exploration and the test drilling to see how realistic the forecasts made there's a report in 2012 that sets out the potential for shale gas, which is very large, but the question he raises is the right one. How much of that will be realistically extractable? And that requires drilling to take place to find out.
Richard Holden.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, in the long term, looking to these measures to increase security and increase supply is incredibly sensible, not only just in terms of getting prices down, but also in terms of delivering energy security. But for many of my constituents still struggling with energy prices now, particularly those off-grid, can the Secretary of State just outline a few of those and where he intends to go further in that short-term support as well?
Mr. Speaker, I think that was the last urgent question that we discussed that, so I will ask the honourable gentleman to look at Hansard.
No. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say I'm fascinated that the Secretary of State thinks that he knows more about the geology of the UK than the geologist who founded Quadrilla, who said quite clearly that the UK is unsuited to widespread fracking. But my question comes back to this issue of consent. The Prime Minister did say that fracking will only go ahead in places where there is support from the local community, which begs the question about why on earth he's even pursuing this idea, since there isn't any support from local communities. But how is he going to measure that, particularly given that this terrible and deeply unpopular decision coincides with the government's draconian new anti-protest laws?
Mr. Speaker, in relation to Quadrilla, the gentleman in question, I believe, left the company 10 years ago, so he's somewhat out of date in terms of the company, that he purports to represent. The current management of Quadrilla are in favour of this. I think local support is important, and one of the things the companies who want to drill for shale gas will have to do will come up with packages that are attractive to local communities, and that, I think, ensures that people actually get some financial reward from shale gas being extracted near them.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to press my right honourable friend further on this issue of how community support is going to be defined and measured, because I have many concerned constituents who want to know that they have a genuine route to rejecting fracking applications that don't have local support, and I'm still not clear what that would be.
Mr. Speaker, there are parts of the country, particularly in relation to nuclear, where local consent and support is very enthusiastic for the development of additional energy sites. So it is perfectly possible to measure and see local support.
Bill Esterson.
The homes of people living near to the Altcar Moss proposed fracking site shook as a result of the tests that he referred to earlier. The Secretary of State said shale gas was safe, but his government paid compensation to residents living near fracking sites in Lancashire. This government's own report says little progress has been made in reducing and predicting the risks. When is he finally going to admit that fracking is a non-starter in this country?
Well, in relation to seismic activity, there is no particular similarity with that from mining, and that mining is not subject to seismic limits.
Sir Greg Knight.
Mr. Speaker, despite what he said, is it not the case that forecasting the occurrence of seismic events as a result of fracking remains a challenge to the experts? Is it not therefore creating a risk of an unknown quantity to pursue shale gas exploration at the present time?
Yes.
Is he aware the safety of the public is not a currency in which some of us choose to speculate?
Mr. Speaker, unusually I disagree with my right honourable friend that it is all a matter of proportionality, and that, as I pointed out, the movement on the ground level that we have from construction is more than double is about double that we have had from any instance with shale gas. So we know what has happened before. There are not limits on mining. There are not limits on ordinary oil extraction. It is only shale gas that has these limits, and there is no evidence that shale gas is worse than any of these other activities. So I think on a balance of risks, my right honourable friend is not coming to the right conclusion.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Much, Mr. Speaker. I take it a bit rich from the self-styled minister for the 19th century that he thinks the CEO of Quadrilla is out of date. His manifesto said that we will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely. Exactly. The science has not proved categorically that it can be done safely. So he is reneging on his solemn promise, which all of them stood on, to the British people in 2019. This is not a legitimate thing for this government to do, is it?
Mr. Speaker, we must reiterate, or I must reiterate, that the former Chief Executive of Quadrilla resigned 10 years ago. He does not represent the company, and that is important, and the House would be put under a misapprehension if it were to think that he were currently involved. As regards the last manifesto, I happily stood on the last manifesto because I had read the 2012 report that went through most of the myths against shale gas and showed that they were wrong and that the extraction of shale gas is safe.
Scott Benton.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State will be aware of the strong objections which many of my constituents have to fracking. The Prime Minister has been quite clear in saying it will only take place if there is strong local support for it. However, this poses many questions. What is a local community and how do you define that? How do you ascertain whether or not it can command local support? And what incentives, if any, are going to be provided to local communities to have fracking imposed upon them? My constituents are understandably anxious about fracking returning to the Foul Coast, and so when will they receive an answer to some of these questions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend asks a very important question, because it is important for the national interest that we have secure supplies of gas. That is something important across the House to all constituents. But this will affect some residents much, much more than others, and therefore it is only right that they are compensated and that they receive some financial benefit for the inconvenience that they will have. Now, I would say to my honourable friend that the majority of the inconvenience does not actually come from the extraction of shale gas, but it comes from the building of the shale gas well in the first place and the lorry movements that are associated with that. And it is important that people benefit and are rewarded for doing something that is in the national interest.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, what studies has the Secretary of State taken of the effect on aquifers where fracking has taken place that are deeply polluted and run well beyond the local community that he's seeking the support for to introduce fracking back into this country? Surely he must understand the dangers of this are going to be here for decades and decades to come, long after whatever small amounts of gas have been extracted, and it's future generations that will suffer because of this policy.
Mr. Speaker, it's no surprise that I disagree with the right honourable gentleman. I would refer him to the 2012 report that was done that went through this and went through what had happened in the United States for comparison purposes. First of all, it found that the evidence on pollution of aquifers was not actually any good, that most of the stories were invented or were scare stories, but in addition to that, the UK has a very good regulatory regime, so the combination of ignoring the scare stories and decent regulation means that one can be confident that aquifers will not be damaged.
Robert Sims.
Can I welcome this announcement? It's one of the few from the front bench which actually will make us a lot richer if we pursue this. It will also make us more resilient in a very difficult world. But the key seems to me what advantage those communities that may be affected can get in terms of financial support. And has the Secretary of State had any discussions with the Treasury? Because it seems to me that if local people do give their consent, it's in the national interest.
I'm very grateful. My honourable friend makes exactly the right point, both ways round, that this is in the national interest, will make the country richer, but it's absolutely right that those affected should be rewarded. And to my mind, that is direct financial reward, not a theoretical one. The last time we discussed fracking, the idea was that communities would be delighted if they got £10 for the village hall. I don't think that's the right way to do it. It needs to be direct to the individuals who are affected, and I've had preliminary discussions with my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, but I don't have a formal thing to announce.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in the northern part of my constituency are rightly concerned about the impact of tremors on their often older buildings, and they're worried about the impact of the extraction of coal bed methane through fracking on their rural way of life. Can the Secretary of State explain in detail, which he hasn't done so far, exactly the mechanism that communities will be able to refuse to allow their consent for coal bed extraction and shale gas fracking? Because compensation is not consent.
Yeah. Well, compensation and consent become two sides of the same coin, that people will be able to negotiate the level of compensation, and it will be a matter for the companies to try and ensure widespread consent by offering a compensation package that is attractive. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, the other side, they howl and wail about this, because actually we're trying to use market forces. It's amazing, a Conservative government using market forces.
Andrew Bridget.
Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that we should have been fracking our shale gas 2 years ago, but we are where we are, and now the best available time to start is immediately?
Rubbish. Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend says only 2 years ago. Why such a short time frame?
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's own figures show only 17% of the public support fracking. 3,000 people in Barnsley signed a petition against it. There is no local consent where I represent. And given the last round of fracking licences were in Yorkshire, how will the Secretary of State ensure that northern communities are not disproportionately affected by this outdated and dangerous way to create energy?
Well, it's definitely not outdated. It's a very effective and modern way of extracting energy. And what I would say to people is, do they want cheaper and more secure energy or not? And if the answer is yes, then fracking is going to be part of the answer.
Jerome Mayhew.
Speaker, the Secretary of State has made repeated reference to a 2012 report which identified considerable potential reserves. How significant might these be in achieving energy security?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. It is an important and fundamental question. The answer is that we need to do the test drilling first to see whether these reserves can be achieved in the way that the 2012 report hoped. But I can't give a firm commitment on that because we haven't done enough test drilling yet.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Coming back to the 2019 Tory Party manifesto, which each member opposite stood on, it states a moratorium on fracking would only be lifted, and I quote from page 55, unless science says it shows it can be done safely. A change in Tory party leadership is not a change in scientific evidence. Can the Secretary of State enlighten the House as to why the government thinks they are both above logic and above science?
Because all the evidence is that it can be done safely, as it is in the United States, and as the 2012 report that I've referred to many times indicated.
Michael Fabricant.
Mr. Speaker, I've been quite shocked, actually, by the Luddites on the front bench, who have been quite open in saying that they're going to weaponise this in a general election. So for those who fear the unknown, may I tell my right honourable friend that the 0.5 limit on the Richter scale is nothing compared to the 1.5 limit on the Richter scale, which Lichfield is currently enduring from pile driving for HS2. If we can live with that, though we don't really like living with that, Mr. Speaker, we can certainly enjoy the benefits from fracking.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an absolutely right and wise point that the motto of honourable members opposite for the next election is let's be cold and poor. That's really the prospectus they're putting before the British people. And as regards seismic activity, there are millions of seismic events of 2.5 or lower in the world every year. We should not assume that every seismic event is the San Francisco earthquake.
John Warren.
Mr. Speaker, lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses, whilst at the same time making it harder for working people to access benefits. Now lifting the safety limits on seismic events or earthquakes to you and me, whilst at the same time protecting, indeed subsidising, oil companies' excessive profits, as well as accelerating climate change. Doesn't this decision really show whose side this Tory government is on?
His Majesty's government is on the side of people who need energy, and of business that needs energy, and of an economy that needs to grow. The party opposite are in favour of no growth, coldness and high prices.
Paul Maynard.
Visit to Costa Coffee on Tuesday morning rivaled the House of Commons chamber this morning for the robustness of debate. There's plenty of opinions expressed. I sought to reassure constituents that they would have the opportunity to have their say because local consent was required. Listening carefully to the Secretary of State this morning, I have yet to hear any explanation of how local consent will be determined, indeed an absence of any reference to local consent. But let me try once more. Will my constituents be asked whether they want fracking or not?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said and the Prime Minister said, we will be looking to have the support of local communities. That is important. And there will be a responsibility for the companies, when they bring forward proposals, to work out how they can get that local consent. And it seems to me pretty clear that that will involve giving money to people to encourage them because they will want to have the benefit locally whilst they are doing something that helps the country nationally.
Paul Williams.
Mr. Speaker, in Wales we know the cost of dangerous fossil fuel extraction so that others remotely can profit. It's particularly acute today, the date of the Gresford mining disaster, where 266 men and boys were killed, 200 women were widowed, 800 children were left fatherless. The coal mine, owned by the Westminster and the United Group, who subsequently destroyed the safety records. Mr. Speaker, Gresford was mooted as a fracking site, and there the men killed remain, by the way, 2,000 feet down. Only 11 bodies were recovered, but mooted as a fracking site. So, will the Secretary of State confirm that he understands that powers on fracking remain with our Senedd, and that he has no intention of trying to return those powers to Westminster?
Mr. Speaker, I am not seeking to upset the devolution settlement.
Craig McKim.
Speaker, even before Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, fracking had advantages because of the benefit for jobs, investment, tax revenues and the balance of payments positivity, which I'd rather was accruing here in the UK rather than sending tens of billions to Qatar and other places. Now, is my right honourable friend aware of the CO2 savings of domestic energy supply? It has been calculated that there are 5 million tonnes of CO2 emitted just for the LNG process of cooling, decasification and also the transport. That has got to be a moral outrage.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right that he takes his argument through logically, unlike many people on the benches opposite. That if we wish to reduce carbon emissions, we are better off using gas as a transition fuel that comes from our own resources rather than importing it. That must be true. And we have those resources. We need the transition fuel. Therefore, we should try and extract it domestically.
John Trickett.
Mr. Speaker, and today's panicky Trumpian announcement is brought about because of the failure of successive Tory governments who squandered the opportunity which coal, oil and gas, our indigenous resources, offered to transform our economy into a carbon-free economy. Will the Minister, the Secretary of State, now confirm that on his target list for fracking, those areas in the north and Yorkshire, which are often described as red wall, and can I finally bring this point to him, there is no local consent in those areas at all for what he's proposing this morning?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it will be important for the companies that wish to extract gas to ensure that there is local support and to come up with packages that make sure that that is forthcoming. It is important that local communities welcome the extraction of shale gas, and I think it's very likely that they will.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Faced with a Russian leader who uses gas supply as a tool of warfare, it is entirely prudent to examine again the viability of all of our domestic energy resources. But can I really encourage my right honourable friend not to lose sight of some of the other big, exciting potential opportunities opening up, for example, floating offshore wind power in the Celtic Sea? And would he meet with myself and other colleagues with an interest in the Celtic Sea to discuss what further steps he and his department can take to further those projects?
Oh, I'd be absolutely delighted to meet my right honourable friend to discuss this. It is something that the department is looking at. We are really enthusiastic about examining all sources. I think floating offshore wind is potentially a very good one. We want to see if we can expedite offshore wind projects so that they happen faster and that we get the supplies coming in. We need to be looking, and we are looking, and we're in discussions with other countries about how we can expedite carbon capture and storage and moving towards hydrogen. That the long-term issues are ones we are focusing on and dealing with, but we have many years of needing gas, and it's why I welcome so much my right honourable friend's support for this announcement.
On Russell Moore.
Speaker, it was this government that has made onshore wind less economical. It is this government that has made solar power and panels less economical. It is this government that blocked wave and tidal power in the Swansea Bay. It is this government that has failed to invest, and now they are trying to cover it up with a fracking giveaway that there will never be any local consent for. Will the Minister, and he's been asked numerous times, confirm that the people in local areas will get a say through a local referendum and it will be binding?
Mr. Speaker, this government's only been in office for about a fortnight, and though I know it's been busy, it hasn't quite managed to do everything that the honourable gentleman suggests. As regards local consent, I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Well, Fletcher.
Speaker, I've listened carefully to the Secretary of State, and I have to say the local consent plans don't seem to wash. It seems to come back to communities being bought off rather than having a vote. So can the Secretary of State confirm once and for all if local residents across Bolsover who are concerned about fracking will get a vote to object to these schemes locally?
Mr. Speaker, I think I made it very clear that the companies will have a deep responsibility to develop packages that make the extraction of shale gas attractive to local communities. It is really important that they succeed in that.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Ellesmere Port have already signalled their opposition to fracking. The planning application was submitted a number of years ago. The local authority rejected it. There was an appeal. Many local residents gave evidence against the application. After 3 years, it was finally decided that it would not be accepted. Today, Chester Zoo, big employer in my constituency, has stated that they're opposed to fracking. Many constituents are repeating their objections. So there is no local consent in Ellesmere Port and Neston. So can the Secretary of State send a message back to the fracking companies that there's no point in coming to ask because they will not get our agreement?
Mr. Speaker, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find. It is absolutely important that we try and get local consent, and that will require the drilling companies to be innovative in the packages they come up with. And we shouldn't be ashamed of paying people who are going to be the ones who don't get the immediate benefit of the gas but have the disruption. That is a perfectly logical thing to do.
The beginning. Yeah. Jason McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just also ask once again how the Secretary of State will measure local consent? Because I have absolutely no confidence in Labour-run Kirklees listening to local wishes. They don't even distribute the Section 106 payments from planning applications to local communities fairly. How would we ensure that those impacted by any fracking wells get any benefit from it?
And my honourable friend hits the nail on the head. It is fundamentally important that the cash benefits do not go to some faceless bureaucracy, but they go to the individuals who are affected. Actually, in the United States, this has made the extraction of shale gas enormously popular because people quite like improving their standard of living, and I think the same is true in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State explain exactly how the UK government deciding to get rid of the fracking ban aligns with their COP26 commitments?
Mr. Speaker, using our domestic resources, as my honourable friend mentioned earlier, reduces our carbon emissions. It's really straightforward.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fracking is an outdated, dangerous and expensive way to produce energy that will not provide the clean, secure energy our country needs. In my constituency, an exploratory fracking site at Barton Moss needed a police operation which cost Greater Manchester Police £1.7 million in 2014, involved 150 police officers across 5 months. Fracking did not have community support, and Greater Manchester Police had to pay the heavy price of policing the demonstrations against it. Why is the government forcing this back on the community in my constituency?
Mr. Speaker, there's a war in Ukraine. We need security of supply.
Martin Docherty Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Secretary of State can advise the House what discussions will take place between his department and the Scotland office in enabling fracking in Scotland.
Mr. Speaker, I regularly have conversations with the Secretary of State for Scotland.
This cannot be justified on environmental grounds, and it cannot be justified on economic grounds. The investment allowance will give gas producers 91 pence in every pound invested in new frack pads. Now, Warwick Business School calculates that fracking could produce 330 billion cubic metres at a maximum, about 100 billion therms. At today's spot price, about 20 minutes ago, that would be £289 billion. Given that the taxpayers are covering 9/10 of the investment, why should they not get 9/10 of the profit?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is making the argument for fracking. If there is that amount that we can get out, we should get it out as quickly as possible, and then we should ensure that it is distributed properly so that the people who are affected benefit, so that the companies who have invested benefit, and yes, so that the taxpayer benefits, because the oil and gas we get out of the North Sea has been an enormous benefit to the taxpayer and has helped us have energy security. So it is a beneficial thing to do. And as regards the economics is straightforward. Private companies will not invest if it's not a good deal. That's the basis of economics, and it's the right basis of economics.
Simon Lowe.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know about you, but I'm sensing some tremors of dissent on the benches opposite. Fracking is expensive and dangerous, but it's also a disaster for our climate. Does the Secretary of State recognise that if every country matched his plans to extract every ounce of gas, the planet would warm by 3 degrees, spelling climate disaster? Does he not understand that this is a plan born of climate denial and economic illiteracy?
Mr. Speaker, this is an alternative replacement source for gas that we are going to use anyway. It is not increasing our demand for gas, and the honourable gentleman misses the ABC of economics.
Mick Whitley.
Yesterday, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Business Secretary confirmed that his departments will be reviewing the level of seismic activity that's permitted to take place at new fracking installations. Meanwhile, the government's energy security strategy pointed rules out lifting the draconian planning restrictions that were imposed on onshore wind by the Cameron government. Onshore wind is one of the cheapest, most popular and fastest to roll out forms of energy production available to us. Meanwhile, fracking, as the Chancellor himself has said, is hugely costly, with little to reduce domestic energy costs and risks inflicting immense damage on local communities and our precious natural environment. Will the Secretary of State concede that the government has got its priorities wrong?
Mr. Speaker, the thing we are lacking at the moment, most acutely, is affordable gas. And gas is the fuel that provides electricity at the margin. So when the wind isn't blowing and when demand is high, It is gas that provides the marginal unit of electricity. It is therefore fundamentally important to our energy security.
Mr. Speaker, the now Chancellor said only a few months ago that no amount of shale gas explored across rural England would lower energy prices, and indeed that private companies would not sell their shale gas to UK customers at lower than the market price. So, Mr. Speaker, ruining our countryside in Sussex, in East Surrey, around Bath, actually, is not the answer. So, why has he, in his first week of office, ended the moratorium on fracking, but not lifted the de facto moratorium on onshore wind?
Mr. Speaker, we need to get as much energy as possible, and fracking does not ruin the countryside. Fracking sites are actually surprisingly small for what they actually do. We have been expanding offshore wind very dramatically. That has been a very big component, and we are continuing with increasing renewables, but we still need that base supply that can be brought on when there is a surge in demand, and that is dependent on gas.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The public will see this as a deceit because there's no economic or price advantage, as we've heard, to this, whilst also damaging the environment. The claim that the public will actually have some say in the consent of this will ring hollow to my community, where the district council opposed a 5G mast, but it was overridden. So can he explain why he thinks that there is any advantage in this when we can't even put in onshore wind in Warwickshire? It's the only county, I believe, in this country where there is no onshore wind.
Energy security and price.
Currents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Secretary of State's constituency, North East Somerset, borders mine in Bristol South. It would be helpful if you could confirm that we're not expecting any fracking in the local community or any seismic events. Equally, in Bristol South, small and medium-sized businesses were innovative about green and future energy. They had the legs cut from underneath them in 2015 when his government cut the green crap. What assurance can he give businesses in Bristol South for future energy development?
Mr. Speaker, the subsidies that are paid, when they are paid, have to be reasonable and proportionate, and that we're finding that with some of the old contracts that we have based on the gas price for renewable energy, which has led to very high prices. That North East Somerset was the site of the old Somerset coalfields, which were a very successful part of the economy historically, and I think everyone in this country will have to do their bit to help with energy security.
Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Secretary of State could placate the Luddites and publish the up-to-date evidence that enabled the government to U-turn both on the manifesto commitments and the previous Prime Minister's policy.
Mr. Speaker, I believe this is completely consistent with the manifesto commitment on the safety of shale gas. The reason why it has come to the fore now is because of the very high price increase in gas and the issue of energy security caused by Putin's invasion of Russia. And that is something that has fundamentally changed. And so, on the balance of arguments and practicalities, with a safe and well-proved technology, it is right now to extract shale gas as far as we can.
Dame Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the government security strategy in 2022 acknowledges, onshore wind is one of the cheapest and easiest renewables to bring on stream. But that same strategy is wishy-washy and lacks any drive for fast tracking of new wind generation. So will the Secretary of State now recognise the urgency of the current situation, revise the strategy, give onshore wind in England the boost it needs to complement the investment in wind that Welsh Labour has continued to promote in Wales, and therefore be able to reduce our reliance, the proportion being some 47% currently, of electricity that is produced from gas?
Mr. Speaker, what we do with renewables is still going to leave us dependent when the wind is not blowing and when there is a surge in demand on gas. And that is an important part of the strategy. So we are building up our wind supplies, we are building up our nuclear supplies, we have plans for more nuclear to come on. This is an important part of it. But for the transition, we still need gas, which is what this announcement is about.
Catherine West.
More fundamental that when a party stands on a manifesto promise, regardless of what it is, that it sticks by that. And that can he rule out today that this announcement, that this proposal is not linked to any donations which were made during the leadership election?
Balderdash.
Sir Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fracking takes huge amounts of water. We have just seen record levels of drought across the entire country, with drier summers predicted for the future. So in periods of drought, will Tory ministers be prioritising precious water supplies to people in their homes or to big fracking companies?
The water for fracking is primarily recycled.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State talks about fracking being in the national interest. The truth is that fracking is in the corporate interest, and that's why this government's pursuing it. This is going to do nothing to lower people's energy bills. Renewables are 9 times cheaper than gas. So at the time that we should be moving away from and ending reliance upon gas, isn't this push really about serving the interests of those energy giants, many of which have close links to his party? And isn't it about time they acted in the interests of the people in Yorkshire and across this country?
Mr. Speaker, what is the honourable gentleman going to say to his constituents when there is no gas going to their boilers to heat their hot water and to heat their homes? This ridiculous hostility to gas as a transition fuel is absurd.
Gabriel.
Mr. Speaker, onshore wind power it was effectively stopped by the Secretary of State's government, yet it's proven in the UK, it's cheap, it's ready to go now and provides zero carbon power, everything that fracking doesn't. So will the threshold for community support for fracking be as tough as that for onshore wind development, where one objector can stop it?
Mr. Speaker, regardless of the benefits of renewables, we still need gas, which is what today's statement is about.
Clive Betts.
The Secretary of State's admitted the environmental impact of fracking, the drilling platforms, the wells, and the lorry movements, which are significant and substantial. The planning system is best placed to deal with these. So in 2018, the Select Committee did a report on planning guidance on fracking, where we concluded that fracking decisions were best made by elected local planning authorities. We don't know what the government's view is, because 4 years later, after that report, we still haven't had a response from ministers to the recommendations we made. Can I say to the Secretary of State, will he give an assurance that by the end of October, when we come back, the government will have responded 4 years late to the report we did?
Mr. Speaker, the Lord President of the Council and Leader of the House is present, and I think that's very much a business question. I would say I'll make sure it's passed on to her, but I hope that she will feel it has been passed on anyway.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listening to members on both sides of the House very gradually teasing out what the Secretary of State really meant when he said that compensation and consent are two sides of the same coin. Why doesn't it just come clean and tell it as it is, that the government intends to change the payment of bribes for planning consent from a criminal offence to the official policy of His Majesty's government?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is a wise and good man, but that point is completely fatuous. That paying people for inconvenience is a perfectly reasonable and commercial thing to do.
Steve Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is this won't provide any immediate relief for consumers. And when in Wales we've taken measures to try and support our energy security, it was the UK government that pulled the rug out under tidal power and tidal lagoons and has failed to make progress on Wilfer Newydd. Now, will you be absolutely clear? The Welsh Government has issued a moratorium on fracking. It's very clear, 1,900 submissions to consultation. Will he absolutely rule out attempting to undermine that position and that consent, that view from the Welsh Government?
Mr. Speaker, there's no plan to change the devolved situation, and I've said that already before, and it's not a matter for my department anyway, so I can give him that assurance. As regard tidal power, the costings simply weren't economic, and that has been a problem with tidal proposals.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has talked a lot about common sense and about using our natural resources. So can you just explain to me why it is the government are not dropping the moratorium on onshore wind?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, we have had an enormous amount of offshore wind come on, and that is a very important part of renewables and has been a very effective way of getting very large quantities of power, and that has been the major concentration of government policy in recent years.
Jeff Smith.
Mr. Speaker, who specifically will be responsible for measuring and determining local consent for fracking?
Mr. Speaker, it will be a matter that will be dealt with in a governmental way, as is normally done when you are seeking to work out what consents are. There are perfectly proper processes for establishing the views of local communities.
Drew Hendry.
Speaker, fracking is the most unpopular and least effective way of producing energy and risks substantial geological impacts, and yet there is no evidence that it will reduce the price of gas. According to the government's own advisers, onshore wind, solar and hydro, including pumped storage, new cutting-edge technologies are all much, much cheaper and much, much safer and popular. Why does he dislike these technologies so much, and whose interests are being furthered by fracking?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is wrong to say I dislike those technologies. I actually think pumped hydro is a particularly interesting technology because it can be used with wind power to act effectively as a battery. So there is support for these, and we are discussing under this urgent question today, Mr. Speaker, shale gas. That doesn't mean that my department is not looking at all forms of energy. We need a wide range of supply, and we need security of supply, and we need to have cheap supply, or as cheap as we can get it.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents across the south of England are deeply concerned about the risks of fracking and indeed oil drilling. Why is the Secretary of State not listening to those concerns? And why is he also not listening to the concerns of the government's former chief scientific advisor and indeed those of the British Geological Survey?
Mr. Speaker, quite properly, the concerns of this House are being represented by members of Parliament, so they are being listened to by Her Majesty's government.
Cat Smith.
It is that the only person who believes that fracking will lower our gas prices is the Secretary of State. It's certainly not backed up by anyone in industry, and there's no question over the environmentally damaging nature of fracking. But one thing I think the Secretary of State is perhaps not aware of is the strength of opposition to fracking in communities like mine in Lancashire, where sites at Preston New Road and Rosica have seen a huge police presence just to manage the protesting. There is no public support for fracking. So I'd like to ask the Secretary of State if he can be very clear to my constituents in Lancaster and Fleetwood whether or not they will be given decision on whether or not fracking happens in Lancashire.
Mr. Speaker, a number of people have said that fracking is environmentally unfriendly. It is more friendly than importing LNG from abroad. It is a lower carbon footprint, and this is fundamentally important. And I'm well aware that there have been objections to fracking, but I would also note that there have been stories widely reported that some of the opposition to fracking has been funded by Mr. Putin's regime.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State recognise that he has now put his government in the absurd position of wanting to impose fracking on communities that don't want it, whilst not allowing onshore wind turbines where communities do want it? Onshore wind turbines are cheap, they are quick to erect, and they normally bring about cheaper energy bills for local communities. So will he please, at last, without reference to offshore wind and everything else that he's doing, will he please answer the question directly? Will he lift the ban on onshore wind?
Community consent is important, and the Honourable Lady is right to point that out.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, but only a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister quoted the Conservative manifesto when she said she was going to reverse national insurance because they had pledged not to increase it. So apparently that was a solemn pledge. But the manifesto also said there would be no fracking where there was no local consent. Apparently not. a pledge. So can the Secretary of State tell us, will local communities be consulted before testing takes place? And who's going to pay the bribes? Will it be the taxpayer, or as he says, the market forces?
Mr. Speaker, the Socialists don't like people being paid for things. It seems to me it's perfectly reasonable to pay people, and if you inconvenience them, you compensate them, and that will be part of the overall package if shale gas can be extracted.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the government aware that fracking is not only a broken promise to the public by the Conservative Party's 2019 manifesto, but it will not cut bills? It is a grossly unpopular method and a method that will warm our planet. It is indeed wrapped up in climate denial.
It's actually none of those things.
Boris Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Minister that I've been listening very carefully to his plea for good common sense. I've always believed good public policy is made on good research and evidence of what works where. Nothing he said today, and indeed on our front bench, has mentioned energy from waste. Energy from waste works successfully up and down our country, in Sheffield, in Leeds, in Southampton, in London. And it not only produces good energy from waste, it also heats many, many homes in the community at low cost. When is the government going to actually look at that and stop diverting attention to fracking?
Mr. Speaker, I'm generally grateful to the honourable gentleman that's a very important point. We do actually export waste, I think, to Denmark. For the Danes to turn it into energy. It seems to me it might be better to do it domestically. I think he's made a very helpful suggestion. I have already talked about it in the fortnight I've been in office, and if he wanted to make further representations to me on it, I'd be very open to hearing them.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State reassure me and my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran that the pernicious and insidious internal market bill or any other sinister mechanism will not, under any circumstances, be used to impose fracking in Scotland against the express wishes of the people of Scotland and Scotland's democratically elected government?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Internal Markets Act is like the Koh-i-Noor diamond. It is one of the jewels of our constitutional settlement.
Margaret Greenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents will be extremely alarmed to hear the Minister's remarks about the exploitation of dangerous fossil fuels. They have made it abundantly clear to me that they care about the environment, they care about the next generation, they take climate change seriously. So I ask him, on behalf of my constituents, will he think again and ban fracking?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady refers to dangerous fossil fuels that people depend on for heating their water and heating their homes every day, that businesses depend on for being in business, that people put in their cars to get around the countryside. We need to ensure that we have a sensible transition. Gas is fundamental to that. Simply wishing the world to be a different world will not be a successful policy.
Rachel Maskell.
Speaker, Yorkshire is currently under a hosepipe ban because we simply do not have the infrastructure in place to provide the resilience for our water. And of course, at the same time, when fracking uses an exorbitant amount of water, this proposal does not make sense. So will he publish an impact assessment about our water infrastructure to ensure that there is resilience in the system before he even considers fracking?
The Honourable Lady raises a very fair point, and it does depend on the water company. In my area, Wessex Water have done a phenomenal job of ensuring that they didn't need hosepipe bans or get close to hosepipe bans because they run their system effectively. And I think the Honourable Lady is right to call upon the water companies to run their systems effectively, because it's hard to believe that the United Kingdom is actually short of water.
Andrew Gwynn.
The Secretary of State is well aware of the strength of feeling against fracking in those communities that are likely to have the applications made by the companies. He's also aware of how the planning system works. He talks about having common consent of the community. If the local authority listens to the community and refuses planning permission, the fracking companies have the option of appealing to the planning inspectorate. It is not within the remit of the planning inspectors to take into consideration common consent as a material planning consideration. Will he change the planning rules to ensure that's not the case?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will know that decisions on planning, when reviewed by the Planning Inspectorate, are made by a Secretary of State acting in a quasi-judicial capacity.
David Linden.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister believes that fracking is so safe and should go ahead with the permission of local residents, can I ask by which date we can expect to see fracking take place in the sprawling country retreat of Chequers for the Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure that, geologically speaking, Chequers is a suitable place for shale gas. I think the question from the Honourable Lady, the member for Bristol South, was actually more apposite, because it may be more likely in my part of the world than in my right honourable friends.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few minutes ago, the Secretary of State mentioned hydrogen. And hydrogen, of course, is the perfect answer, because when you burn it, you get water. It's totally green and totally clean. Mr. Speaker, there are well-developed plans for the production and storage of hydrogen based on the Comity Firth. Can I cordially invite either the Secretary of State or one of his ministerial team to come north to my constituency to see what we're going to do?
Mr. Speaker, I could not agree with the honourable gentleman more. I think hydrogen is ultimately the silver bullet. I can see how you create it from renewable sources, because you have the wind power when people are not drawing on the electricity system. You use it as an effective battery, and it then can be, with some adjustments, piped through to people's houses to heat them during the winter. There are real opportunities with hydrogen, and we get some heckling from the Socialist front bench, and I would point out to them that everyone accepts that gas is a transition fuel. So to get to where the honourable gentleman wisely wishes us to go, we need more natural gas as the transition fuel. But the honourable gentleman is right, and I don't know that I can promise a visit in the short term, but I'd love to come in principle, and my ministers are like the greyhounds in the slips, waiting to get up to his constituency.
Patrick Reilly.
Glasgow North don't want to see fracking anywhere on these islands, so ending what was in effect a UK-wide moratorium on fracking doesn't exactly speak to strengthening the union. But what my constituents would like to know is whether the Business Secretary actually believes that we face an anthropogenic climate emergency, and if so, how on earth a rush to fracking source fossil fuels helps to meet the climate and emission reduction targets we've committed to.
As my honourable friend, the member for Thanet, pointed out, using our own resources emits less carbon than importing gas. So therefore, if the honourable gentleman actually believes what he has just said, he should be supporting this policy.
Jim Shallow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The shale gas extraction question today has shone the spotlight upon energy crisis, upon the Ukraine's war that Putin is carrying out against them. The others have referred to it, and I want to ask the Secretary of State this question. In relation to those who live close by, who will have their houses devalued, will have an impact upon their lifestyle, the Secretary of State has referred to compensation. No quantifying of the compensation has been made. Can I ask the Secretary of State this question? Will the compensation be a one-off payment for the value of their house? Will it be no energy costs? Will it be no rates? What does the Secretary of State understand that the compensation will be?
As always, the honourable gentleman waits patiently to ask a fundamentally important question, and I'm very grateful to him, and as always for his assiduous attendance in the House. How the compensation packages will be worked up seems to me to be something that will be really important to gaining communities' consent, and there will be different approaches that work in different areas and different settings, but they need to be the right approach to obtain the consent. So this is something that must be developed, and the honourable gentleman's views on how it could best be developed will be extremely welcome.
Thank the Secretary of State. Business questions, Shadow Leader of the House, Thangham and Debonair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Leader of the House if she will give us the forthcoming business.
Madam Deputy Speaker, before I give the business, I hope you will permit me to place on record my admiration and thanks for all those who enabled the mourning of Her late Majesty to be so exquisite, including the actions of the general public. It was done so well, it was done with much love. We did her proud.
Subject to the House's agreement of the motion on today's order paper, the business for Friday the 23rd of September will be: the Chancellor of the Exchequer will make a statement on the Government's plans for growth. Subject to the House's agreement, the House will then rise for the conference recess and return on Tuesday the 11th of October. The business for the week commencing the 10th of October will include Tuesday the 11th of October, consideration of an allocation of time motion, followed by all stages of the Health and Social Care Levy Repeal Bill. Wednesday the 12th of October, second reading of the Identity and Language Northern Ireland Bill Lords, followed by a motion relating to the Procedure Committee's recommendations relating to proxy voting. Thursday the 13th of October, second reading of the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill. Friday the 14th of October, the House will not be sitting. The provisional business for the week commencing the 17th of October includes Monday the 17th of October, remaining stages of the Public Order Bill.
Leader of the House, Stangan Debonnaire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the House for the forthcoming business, and I would also like to join her in commending the House and member staff, as well as members across this place, who worked so hard, both with the lying in state and the tributes to the late Queen. I also agree, I think we did Her Majesty proud, and it was an honour to close the debates, the tributes, with the Right Honourable Lady. May I also commend her for the impeccable way in which she took up her role as Lord President so swiftly, becoming the first woman to proclaim a new monarch and do so with great poise. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Leader's response to my question 2 weeks ago about the appointment of a new government ethics advisor, and the Leader said then the Prime Minister would get round to it swiftly. Well, at least they're planning to appoint one. The government has been missing one for months now, so where's the urgency? Could the Leader tell us exactly where this ranks on the Prime Minister's to-do list? Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, an ethics advisor could have offered guidance to the Cabinet Office, who seem to think it's appropriate to assist the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip by commissioning legal advice on his behalf. Does the Leader think that this, what looks like interference with the House Privileges Committee inquiry, was appropriate? Does she expect the member in question to repay any money that was spent by taxpayers? On legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't see any listing in the statement for legislation on the energy bills crisis, and there doesn't seem to be an actual bill yet. So can I ask if there's going to be legislation, when we will see it, and when we will actually debate and vote on it? On legislation that the government seems to be planning to bin in their bonfire of bills, the Prime Minister indicated the Bill of Rights and the Animal Welfare Bill will be scrapped. And the Business Secretary has apparently also told officials to stop work on the energy bill. Is there some clarity we could have here? Could the Leader confirm if the government is planning to drop these bills? And while we're on broken manifesto promises, we are now told that there is no chance of a trade deal with the US anytime soon, despite it being a #1 priority in 2019, then a deadline of mid-21, and apparent significant progress last summer. And I do wonder who it was who was the Trade Secretary and then the Foreign Secretary who seemed to have messed this up so badly. I do also wish to ask about the swerving of scrutiny. The government yesterday, the Business Secretary yesterday, announced the fuel bill relief scheme before coming to this House, which, Mr Speaker, had specifically asked the new Prime Minister to not do as previous Prime Ministers had, and ministers. Now, instead of voluntarily providing a ministerial statement today, he's had to be dragged to Parliament to face questions. Could the Leader have a word with him, please? The Leader also announced that the Chancellor will make a statement tomorrow, a so-called mini-budget, yet members will only have what looks like a few hours to scrutinise it, and there is no accompanying briefings from the Office of Budget Responsibility. Just changing the name doesn't really change what it is, or the need for those economic briefings. I have to ask, what is it the government is seeking to hide? Can she answer why we're only getting half a day? And why will there actually, in fact, be any economic forecasts made tomorrow? Madam Deputy Speaker, At the end of the day, politics is about choices. This Prime Minister is choosing to lift the cap on investment bankers' bonuses over putting money back into working people's pockets. She is choosing to back the fossil fuel lobby by lifting the ban on fracking over investing in renewable energy. She's choosing to make the British people pay for her energy policy with debt piling up into the future. Labour's plan to make sure people don't have to pay a penny more this winter would have been funded by a windfall tax on oil and gas companies' windfall profits. When it comes to choices, the Tories are choosing to side with bankers and oil and gas giants, while Labour is choosing to side with everybody else. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well, can I start by thanking the Honourable Lady for her very kind remarks. It was a privilege to do the Accession Council. The government has set out very clearly what its immediate priorities are. The Prime Minister will get to the matter of an ethics advisor, but her priorities, as she has stated, have been ensuring that people in this country can see a doctor and a dentist. It has been, and you won't have to wait very long to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Health on that matter. It is about getting growth back into our economy and building a modern economy through supply-side reform. Again, the House will not have long to wait to hear about that plan directly from the Chancellor, and can question him on the legislative programme that will follow. And clearly dealing with the cost of living issues, which are of major concern to both household and businesses. And we have had clearly the Secretary of State for Bayes' time this morning in talking through his proposals. Those are the government's priorities. We are acting on those. It was clearly right that we observed a period of mourning for Her late Majesty, but this week is the first opportunity we've had to bring these measures forward and present them to the House, and we are doing so. Those are the Prime Minister and her government's priorities. She raises the issue of the trade a trade deal with the United States. There is good news and there is bad news. Clearly, we would have wanted a tariff arrangement faster than the US is prepared to move, but we will continue to press them on that. The opposition can help us in that by outlining why this is a good idea for both the UK and the United States to their friends in the Democratic Party. But we have not been idle in the meantime. She will know that we have been pursuing state-level arrangements on non-tariff barriers to trade, removing those. We've signed 2. We have a further 25 states interested, and the first 8 we sign will be equivalent to 20% of the US economy. So that is the bad news. The good news is, at long last, the Labour Party are supportive of a trade deal with the United States, and I'm delighted to hear that. As with regard to handling of business, it is incredibly important that the House hears things first. We want to ensure that the House has the time it needs, both to question ministers in statements, but also time to scrutinise legislation. A wise man once said, "It is a fundamental constitutional right that this House should be told things first." That is the former leader of the House and the Secretary of State for Bayes, and I will hold him to it. We have some major challenges facing this country because of the war in Ukraine, an incredibly volatile economy, and I do hope that we can take the mood of unity and cooperation that has been the flavour of this House in recent days and apply them to these problems together for the benefit of all the people we serve.
Sir John Redwood.
Will the government allow us an early debate on its growth strategy, which will be most welcome, so that Parliament can have an opportunity to put forward good ideas on obstacles and barriers to better paid jobs and more investment which still exist under our current panoply of law?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising these issues. Clearly, the Chancellor will be making a statement tomorrow, but he will know how to apply for a debate on all these issues. And it is very important that we are consulting and listening to businesses and our constituents. The best ideas governments have come from people who are doing those jobs, who are taking those risks and wanting to put growth back into our economy.
SNP spokesperson Deirdre Brock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Leader for her statement. I, too, want to pay tribute on behalf of my SNP colleagues and myself to the staff of these Houses of Parliament for their exceptional work in preparing and carrying out the various ceremonies and duties required after the sad passing of Queen Elizabeth. They were outstanding. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome very much the content of the statutory instruments being debated this afternoon, tightening the sanctions against Putin and his supporters, particularly after his recent threats. I see recently, though, that US intelligence estimates over $300 million of Russian money has been ploughed into influencing politicians in more than 24 countries. Now, it's suggested this is just the tip of the iceberg. So can we have a debate in government time about thwarting possible Russian influence on UK politics to reassure the public? Isn't it extraordinary, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, that despite only sitting a handful of times since the end of July and our constituents facing the biggest cost of living crisis in decades, members are about to trot off for conference recess rather than debating these problems fully here and now? And we can at least expect a short fiscal statement before then, elements of which have been trailed in the media. This government displaying its customary, almost casual disrespect for this place. So we've seen some of the rabbits the Chancellor likely intends pulling out of his hat on Friday, but so far they look awfully like leftovers from the discredited trickle-down economics theory, so beloved of the right wing, but which, as President Biden himself pointed out recently, has never worked. I hear too the government is lodging its Revocation and Reform Bill, or as it was formerly known, the comically named Brexit Freedoms Bill today. Now, I say comical, but the prospect of this House and the devolved parliaments being bogged down again for many months in secondary legislation as the zealots on government benches try to extinguish every trace of the EU from UK legislation, threatening protections for workers' rights and food standards, amongst so many others, is far from funny. Can she indicate when we'll have that come to the House for debate? And finally, it is no wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, that data from the latest British Social Attitude Survey out today shows support in Scotland for the Union is continuing to drop like a stone, as more and more folk recognise that only independence offers them hope and a progressive future.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I thank her for her kind remarks to all those who contributed to the mourning of our late Queen. I know that the House authorities are considering how members can express their gratitude towards staff for what they've done, perhaps using the intranet to do that, so all staff can read how we feel and how proud we are of what they have done. Our Prime Minister has recommitted us at UNGA and sent a message to the world that our resolve towards Ukraine will not waver, that we will continue to lead the charge on combating Russian aggression, and that includes the financial measures that we have been pioneering and leading others on. That will continue, and clearly there will be time for members to raise this in the general debate today. I can reassure her that myself, the Chief and others have ensured that the time we have rightly taken to mourn Her late Majesty does not slow down our legislative programme. We are confident that whether it is on cost of living measures or on sanctions or any other matter, there will be no real-world delay to those measures being brought forward. She asks specifically about the EU retained law bill. We will bring that forward for first reading on the 11th of October, and we will continue to push and speed up the legislation, whether it is on growth or these other measures that we are bringing to the floor of the House. I would end by saying that I think all of the four nations of our United Kingdom have shown the strength there is in unity over the last few weeks. I think it has been the most tremendous event, a tremendous coming together and a tremendous welcoming of our new King, King Charles III. And I am absolutely confident that public opinion, that in the strength of the United Kingdom will remain strong in all 4 nations of this United Kingdom.
Karen Bradley.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend to her new role and join her in the tributes that she paid to the staff and others in this place who made the lying in state such a special occasion. She was new to the job and, I must say, acted with incredible dignity and grace throughout. As Chair of the Procedure Committee, I would like to extend a warm welcome to her to come in front of the committee on many occasions during her tenure as Lord President of the Council, and also thank her for announcing that the Procedure Committee's report on proxy voting will be subject to a vote when we return from the conference recess. Can I ask her, could she confirm that there will be time for a debate on that motion, and also will we revert to the traditional way of voting on these matters, that this is a free vote and a matter for the House to decide?
Well, yes, I thank my right honourable friend for her kind remarks and can confirm that we undertook to allow a debate on this. That is our plan on the 12th of October. Clearly, these are matters for the House and they should be a free vote.
Chair of the Backbench Business Committee, Ian Mears.
Very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement, but and I know that obviously circumstances are completely beyond her control in terms of what's been happening over the last few weeks, but a significant amount of parliamentary time and backbench time has been lost. And obviously, so there's some disappointment that there isn't any backbench time in the first week back after the conference recess. So notwithstanding and understanding that the government want to get on with their own agenda, could I just gently remind the Leader of the House that we do have enshrined in standing orders a requirement for a certain number of days of backbench time that we have to have. And can I also remind members across the House, we would still very much welcome applications for Westminster Hall debates, which we can allocate time for as the backbench business.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this. I know it is incredibly important to give good notice for not just allocating time, but also when that will be in order for his committee to plan. And I'm pushing to be able to give him some information in very short order.
To Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend to her new responsibilities, and I welcome too that at the last Prime Minister's question, our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, confirmed the government will be bringing back the online safety bill. Can I ask my right honourable friend 2 things? First of all, can she make sure that that happens urgently? This bill has been carried over once already, and there is a considerable need to get on with it. And secondly, and without wishing to cut across the first, can she make sure that if the tweaks that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, referred to that bill are to be more than cosmetic, that those of us in this House are able to see them before the bill goes to the other place?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising those 2 important points. I know that the new Secretary of State at DCMS is looking at the legislation she wants to bring forward with great urgency. She will have heard his remarks today, but I shall also write and raise these issues and ask her to get in touch with the honourable gentleman, who is very knowledgeable about these issues.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many households in my constituency have seen their energy bills going up by upwards of 500% as they're on heat networks which are not regulated by Ofgem. Now, the Energy Security Bill would make Ofgem the regulator and introduce a price cap, but there have been reports that the Prime Minister is set to either pause or scrap the bill entirely. So can the Leader of the House reassure this House and my constituents that that bill will not be scrapped and that a price cap will be introduced?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for raising those important points. Business will be announced in the normal way, but I'd be very happy to raise those points with the Secretary of State and ask that he contact her office.
Villiers.
Can we have an urgent debate on Hindu-phobic hate crime? Recent days have seen a number of appalling acts of intimidation and harassment directed against the Hindu community, including a violent mob targeting a temple and tearing down a flag with spiritual significance. And I think it is important that these disgraceful episodes are discussed by this Parliament.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising this, and we have all seen some very sad sights reported in the news of the tensions, and particularly in Leicester, which does not have, as a city, a history of that nature. It has a reputation for being a very harmonious place indeed. She will be able to apply for debates in the normal way. The policing issues are local issues, but I know that the Home Secretary is being kept informed, and all this, of course, has played out against that backdrop of national unity, which makes those events even more sad.
Vera Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, may I join colleagues across the House in congratulating everybody who contributed to the outstanding arrangements of events in this House following her late Majesty's death. Madam Deputy Speaker, parents on universal credit who are full-time carers for children with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions rely on a series of additional benefits, but these stop immediately if a child sadly dies. It places a heavy financial burden and hardship on parents who are already suffering from extreme stress and grief, as has happened to one of my constituents. Will the government make time for a debate to discuss bereavement support for parents who have been full-time carers for children with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions?
Yeah. Well, I thank the Honourable Lady both for her kind remarks about staff and others who enabled those amazing events to occur over the last few weeks, and also for raising this incredibly important issue. She will know that the new Secretary of State at DWP has held this particular aspect of that department's portfolio and has been very concerned with all aspects of bereavement and ensuring the welfare system supports people at the right time and is considerate to the grief that they are experiencing. The Secretary of State will have heard her remarks today. I shall make sure she does and raise them with her, and she can, of course, raise this issue at the next questions that arises.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week at the United Nations General Assembly, President Biden hosted the 7th replenishment conference of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria. Unfortunately, the United Kingdom government was not able to make a pledge. As a former International Development Secretary, my right honourable friend will know the impact that the Global Fund has had in relation to the eradication of HIV, TB and malaria, and therefore will she ensure that the United Kingdom government comes forward as soon as possible with a statement on its intention to contribute to that replenishment fund?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising the profile of the Global Fund, which does do tremendous work, and the UK has been a leader in ensuring that it does have the funds to carry out this work, which benefits us all, as well as the countries it is particularly focused on. The Minister for Development restated during that replenishment conference the UK's strong commitment to that fund. We continue to be committed to it, and we'll be making an announcement on our pledge in the coming weeks.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the House will be aware that there have been a number of hospital rebuilds in the pipeline for quite a long time, but the money doesn't seem to be forthcoming from the Treasury, and the hold-up's been going on for years. Now, there may be some reference to this in the statement tomorrow, but I don't think it's very likely. If there isn't, could we have a statement from either a Health Minister or a Treasury Minister?
You can have a statement from a Health Minister in nanoseconds. The Secretary of State will be at the dispatch box. The Honourable Gentleman should feel free to raise those issues with her. But if he has any difficulty in obtaining clarity around, he no doubt be interested in local schemes. I will, of course, assist him in getting those answers.
Maggie Throop.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Next Tuesday, the 27th of September, I'm holding the Erewash Jobs and Community Fair 2022. For the first time since the start of the pandemic, it's an in-person event with local and regional businesses attending to promote the job vacancies and apprenticeship opportunities that they have. Does my honourable friend agree that we must use whatever levers we have possible, such as job fairs, to promote the importance of having a healthy and productive workforce? And can we have a debate in government time to explore other levers that we can use to ensure that we have that workforce that we really need for productivity?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue. We have a great track record in this area, very low unemployment, 2 million women in work than there were in 2010. We've halved the disability employment gap. And in addition to the work that DWP and other government departments have been doing, it is very much down to local engagement, things like job fairs. And I know, and I would thank the Honourable Lady for all the work she has done in her constituency to support her constituents, finding jobs, getting into work, sometimes for the first time.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, and can I also welcome the Right Honourable Lady to her new role. In light of the leaks to the media over the last few days, could we have a debate to find out why this government believes that to make the poor work harder or try harder, we should cut their benefits, but actually to get wealthy bankers to work harder, we should increase their bonuses?
Yeah. Well, the Chancellor will be in this place tomorrow, and members will be able to question him on what his policies are, rather than speculating about what it has or has not been in the media. And I hope that Madam Deputy Speaker and Mr. Speaker would approve of that.
Sir John Hayes.
Deputy Speaker, since the death of Queen Elizabeth II, we have witnessed an extraordinary nation-wide, indeed kingdom-wide, response, a moving mix of sorrow at our loss, and celebration of a life of remarkable service, so that that mood is marked forever and remembrance can last for generations to come. A fitting national memorial needs to be established. Will the Leader of the House therefore agree that a statement be brought to this House on what form that memorial might take? For me, a statue on the final plinth in Trafalgar Square would be ideal.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his suggestion. Clearly, these will be matters that will concern many members, but they will involve other bodies outside of this House. But I shall certainly raise this with the Secretary of State for DCMS and ensure that she properly consults members on their wishes as plans are taken forward.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The evidence of the physical and mental health benefits of greater access to the countryside is overwhelming. Yet we only have a legal right to roam on 8% of English land and 3% of rivers. So could we have a debate in government time on the need to expand the Countryside and Rights of Way Act to cover rivers, woods and greenbelt? And will the government support my private member's bill published today that would succeed in doing exactly that?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising these issues. I hope, subject to the motions on the order paper today agreeing recess dates, to very swiftly be able to publish the next schedule of departmental questions to enable honourable members to raise these issues directly with the departments. But I thank the lady for making us aware of her private bill.
Caulfield.
Speaker, on page 33 of the Conservative Party manifesto, the government pledged to protect greenfield sites and prioritise brownfield sites for development. Yet in practice, planning inspectors are overturning local democratic planning authorities' decisions to refuse building on greenfield sites. Most recent is South Rose in Wivelsfield in my constituency, and we have Nolan's Farm in Plumpton and Mornings Mill in Polegate also facing a similar fate. Can we have a debate in government time about the commitment to the government's pledge in its manifesto and the promise made by the Prime Minister to the Father of the House most recently, and the role of the planning inspector in overturning these democratic decisions?
I call the Leader of the House. I do want to try to get everybody in, so it's quite important that the questions are brief. Leader of the House.
During the recent leadership contest, the Prime Minister restated her commitment both to empowering local people, but also keeping our promises in our manifesto. I hope that will give the Honourable Lady some comfort, but she will obviously be able to question the Prime Minister in the usual way, and her voice will have been heard today.
Barry Sherman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, welcome to the new Leader of the House. I look forward to meeting every week. Could she very quickly make a statement to the House about the welfare of the people who work here? Increasingly, the members of Parliament who are wearing air quality detectors are picking up that this is not a safe environment to work in. Something should be done about it.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this issue and look forward to our weekly meetings that he promises. I shall certainly take up the issue he raises with House authorities.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend not only in becoming Leader of the House, but Lord President of the Council. And in that latter capacity, will she urge the Privy Council not to agree to the proposed change in name of Linacre College, Oxford, to that of a Vietnamese billionaire who is proposing to give £155 million to the college? If we want to clean up this country from dirty money and dodgy donations, this would be a good place to start.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising this matter. I will ensure that the Department for Education will have heard what he says. I suspect that is the more appropriate and swiftest way of resolving the issues that are of concern to him.
Speaker, can we have a debate on the treatment of British citizens in Spanish prisons? Because my Livingston constituent, Jamie Lee Fielding, is nearly 7 months pregnant, has gestational diabetes, and despite having paid the fine the Spanish authorities in Tenerife are holding her, removing vital food and medication and breaching her human rights, she has a very short window to get home to have her baby. Will the Leader of the House press the Foreign Secretary to help get Jamie Lee home and meet with me so that I can do everything I can to make sure that she's safe, healthy and home as soon as possible?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for raising the plight of her constituent, and I will certainly do that. I will raise this with the Foreign Office and urge them to be in touch with the honourable lady.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I join with my right honourable friend, the member for Chipping Barnet, in condemning the violent attacks made on Hindu temples in Leicester and Smethwick only just last night. But next week, the Hindu festival of Navratri begins, and on the 24th of October, we will celebrate Diwali, and the following day, Hindu New Year. The Hindu community in this country are seriously concerned about their safety in going about their celebrations. So could my right honourable friend arrange for an urgent statement to be made by the new Home Secretary on what arrangements are going to be made to make sure that our Hindu friends and neighbours are able to celebrate their religion in peace and harmony as they've always done?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point, and as he stresses, this is also a very timely issue as well. I will certainly take that up with the Home Secretary.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week, the government's £150 cost of living payments to disabled people started to go out. But unpaid carers like Katie Stiles have said that that amount won't scratch the surface of what is needed. Katie's husband, Mark Stiles, has a rare form of motor neuron disease and, like many disabled people, relies on equipment which uses electricity and on his home being kept warmer so he doesn't get chest infections. This is a widespread issue for disabled people and their unpaid family carers. So can we have a debate in government time so that we can raise these issues with ministers?
I thank the honourable lady for raising this important issue. It is a matter for the Department for Work and Pensions, but also for the Department for Health and Social Care. The Secretary of State for that latter department will be in the House shortly. She should raise that with her or in the usual way, but I shall certainly make sure both departments are aware of the honourable lady's concerns.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree with right honourable and honourable friends who have spoken in praise over the scenes that we've seen in the last extraordinary scenes that we've seen over the last 2 weeks, nowhere more so, of course, than in my constituency of West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, when the world saw the community of Royal Deeside pay tribute to Her late Majesty as she was taken from Balmoral on her final journey. A lot of the ceremonial of those 2 weeks were organised by Lord Lieutenants across the country who remain unpaid. So I wondered if my right honourable friend would agree to a debate in government time on the Scottish National Party government's austerity agenda, which not only is slashing millions of pounds from education in Scotland and from local government in Scotland, but also tens of thousands of pounds from the budgets of the Lord Lieutenants who play such a crucial role in our national life, as has only just been proven over the last 2 weeks.
Well, if The Scottish Nationalist Party is clearly obsessed with issues that are of little concern to the people of Scotland in terms of their public services, their ability to access healthcare or get their bins emptied, or any of the other things that the party is dropping the ball on. But I do think that these services that are provided, that focal point for communities, and also the link to our royal family are incredibly important and should be preserved and cherished.
Ian Paisley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Leader of the House must be alarmed at what happened in Hong Kong on Monday evening when a citizen there paid respects to Our late Majesty the Queen and has been arrested under the sedition laws. I'm wondering if any representations have been made by this government to the to the Chinese embassy here about that, which seems to be a terrible way to treat a citizen in Hong Kong.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that appalling event that I'm sure will have dismayed every member of this House. I shall certainly ask the Foreign Office to contact the honourable gentleman to confirm what has been done in the wake of that.
Anna Firth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to also add my thanks to everyone in this House for the brilliant national commemorative events. May I take a moment, Madam Deputy Speaker, to thank those locally who worked so hard as well to make our local events in Southend West so dignified. The Mayor, the Council officers, community groups, church leaders, the police and the Scouts. Would I agree with my honourable friend who's asked for a national debate on permanent tributes to Her late Majesty? Would my honourable friend agree with Chalkwell lifeguards who are already suggesting a Queen Elizabeth II life-saving award in honour of their late patron?
Well, I will join with my honourable friend in thanking everyone across the country who did so much to enable all our communities to properly pay tribute and mourn the loss of our great Queen. She is gone, but her values still remain with us, and I think there will be a huge interest, not just in a permanent memorial to her, but also in many schemes that are strengthening our communities and bringing people together as she did in life.
Janet Davey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents in Lewisham East live in buildings with district heating networks. They are not covered by the energy price cap, with some paying 13 times the energy cap. Similar to my honourable friend from Battersea, I was alarmed to see reports that the energy bill, which could put in place regulation for heating networks, may be halted or dropped. Could the Leader of the House ask the Business Secretary to come to the floor to clarify the future of this legislation, specifically on this issue?
Well, I know many honourable members have put questions to the Business Secretary earlier today. I will certainly raise the specific issues that she does with him, but business will be announced in the usual way.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my deep concern about the decision of PayPal, the online payments company, to cancel the accounts of certain organisations, including Us for Them, who campaigned against the COVID lockdowns, and perhaps most ironically the Free Speech Union, who appear to have been targeted because of their views on sex and gender? As we move towards a cashless economy, these companies form part of the essential infrastructure of ordinary life. And will the government take steps to ensure that they cannot discriminate against individuals or organisations on the basis of perfectly legal political views?
So the honourable gentleman may have further information than I do about why the PayPal had cancelled the account and that facility from the organisations that he mentions. But from what I understand, the Free Speech Union and other organisations are also still in the dark about exactly why they have had those services removed from them, despite making great efforts to find out. And I think this is a common theme amongst our casework for many members in this House, whether it's cancelling contracts, whether it is trying to get an error resolved with firms. It is very difficult for people to speak directly to someone to try and get a situation resolved or make a decision about reorganising how they're going to, in the case that he raises, make those payments. I think that is a very good topic for a debate, and I would encourage honourable members who are concerned about customer services in some of these organisations to bring it forward and ask for a debate in the usual way.
Trish Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 6.7 million households across the UK already live in fuel poverty, with a current cap price of £1,971. Will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out if she believes an energy cap rising by another £600 helps householders such as those in my constituency of North Ayrshire and Arran who already cannot afford to pay their energy bills, as well as householders who will shortly find themselves added to these soaring numbers in fuel poverty as a direct result of this new increase in the price cap?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that we have acted swiftly to bring forward measures to help both households and businesses with the rising cost of energy. But this government is also going to address the underlying issues which are exacerbating the problem. One has been announced today, and the Business Secretary has answered an urgent question on it. And I would urge all members of this House to also concentrate on the issues which will help us increase supply of energy, as well as controlling the costs.
Williams.
Air ambulance is a vital service for many areas in the United Kingdom, but no more so in the rural areas of Mid Wales. The Welsh Air Ambulance is a great charity and very dear to my constituents' hearts, and something we support all year round. They're, however, reconfiguring the bases, and the air ambulance at Welshpool Airport that we're very, very proud of looks to be moved more north. Could I ask for a debate in government time around the funding and coverage of air ambulances, because this important service is incredibly important to rural Wales and we must keep it.
Hear, hear.
Just a quick reminder that must be brief. I want to get everybody in. Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this important issue. We often forget that this incredible service that is provided across the country by many organisations, there are in fact charities. It's right that local people have input onto how these services are running in that area, and he will know that as a government we have changed our treatment of air ambulances to ensure that they are able to financially thrive. But I thank him for raising these important points today.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the government still intend to bring forward legislation in this Parliament to amend, repeal or replace the Human Rights Act, or to constrain the independence of the judiciary by further restricting judicial review?
Well, all future business will be announced in the normal way.
Leila Moran.
Historic Boars Hill in my Oxford constituency is facing the prospect of a grossly inappropriate development. Peking University HSBC Business School, which is owned by the Chinese Communist Party, have submitted a planning application to vastly expand the campus at Foxcombe Hall. Now, the Planning Committee has narrowly approved the application, weighing economic benefit against the loss of the Greenbelt, but as far as I can see, the main beneficiary of any economic activity is the Chinese state and not the local area. Our hope now sits with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, who has the right to call it in, but with recesses and no questions, many letters written, I'm desperate for a meeting with him and his officials to explain why this is the wrong choice both locally and nationally.
Well, I'm aware that the Honourable Lady has made a formal request for this planning application to be called in by for the Secretary of State's consideration. That may limit some of the conversations she might be able to have with him, but I will write to him seeking guidance from his department about what is the most appropriate way for the Honourable Lady to be engaged on this. And further to the comments I made earlier to my honourable friend for the New Forest, she should also raise this with the Department for Education.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff has been interviewed by the FBI in connection with electoral bribery in Puerto Rico. So could we please have a government statement on this to consider if any UK laws may have been broken? The FBI interview has affected the Chief of Staff's security status, and whether the Prime Minister was informed of the FBI interview before her Chief of Staff's appointment was confirmed.
Well, I will refer the honourable gentleman to statements that have been issued on this matter. I don't think it is an issue that should be debated at length on the floor of this House. And I can assure him that everything that you would expect him to do is being done, but I don't think it is a matter for debate here.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Council Trust figures this summer showed that 4 in 10 of those on universal credits were already skipping meals. Yep. Given that there is going to be another price hike in the next few days, does the Leader of the House expect to be timetabling in yet another fiscal statement, or does she expect our constituents to simply starve?
Well, I would suggest that the Honourable Lady comes to the House tomorrow and raises issues directly with the Chancellor. I know it is his intention to set out the plan for growth and how this will assist her constituents, and she will have ample time to be able to question him then and in the future.
Graham Morris.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about the government's commitment to transparency in the protection of whistleblowers. Whistleblowers like my constituent Paul Calvers have been left in limbo, suffering great stress, and many bereaved families are questioning the decision to appoint NHS insider dame Marianne Griffiths to lead the review into systematic cover-ups by the North East Ambulance Service. Can we have a statement or a general debate in government time on the protection of whistleblowers and on ensuring transparency in the public service so that we can learn any lessons that need to be learned? Thank you.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises an important constituency matter, which I will be happy to raise with the Secretary of State for Health. But he is right, we owe people who whistleblow a huge debt, and they need to be protected.
Annie Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There used to be 2 trains an hour from Penge West and Annerley stations in my constituency to London Bridge. Now there are none. And from Sydenham and Forest Hill stations, the number has halved. Govia Thameslink tell me that due to a reduction of government funding in the 2021 spending review, they've had to cut capacity. But it's having a huge impact on my constituents, their ability to access employment, education and healthcare. So can we please have a debate in government time about support for regional rail networks?
Well, this government has done a huge amount to support not just existing rail, but also build new schemes and helping our towns and cities connect in ways they have not before. But I would also just urge the Honourable Lady that she may wish to raise this at the next transport questions, which is on the 13th of October.
Hugh Hendry.
Deputy Speaker, a number of my constituents have contacted me to complain that the Financial Conduct Authority have failed to protect them from false investment scams, including so-called mini-bonds. This is despite flags being raised, and the FCA has accredited it in listed companies despite directors not actually being real people. The FCA rules are clearly unfit for purpose. Can we have a debate in government time on how to reform the rules and provide some genuine protection for those who've been targeted?
The honourable gentleman raises a very important issue, which I'm sure will be of concern to many members in this House. I would urge him to raise this at the next Treasury questions, which is on the 11th of October, but I shall certainly make sure the Treasury have heard what he's said today.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thousands of constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth live in blocks of apartments that are affected by fire and building safety defects. As well as needing to get the defects fixed, many of them are unfortunately facing spiralling insurance costs and also a failure to see the government's guidance to lenders being implemented by lenders and the ability to get mortgages and so on. Could we have a statement from the new Minister for Housing urgently, or one of the Treasury Ministers, so we can debate these important issues?
Well, I would by all means encourage the honourable gentleman to raise that matter with both departments, but also some of the issues he touches on are devolved.
The death of Mahsa Amini in Iran for allegedly breaking hijab rules was shocking, as was the Iranian authorities' response to the subsequent protests. Can we have a statement from the government and the support they are providing to human rights activists in Iran, including those who have to seek asylum here in the UK?
Well, I'm sure that all members of this House would want to echo the comments that the Honourable Lady has made. It was the most barbaric and appalling act, and has caused a huge amount of disquiet. Clearly there are repercussions unfurling now in Iran. I shall certainly make sure that the FCDO respond to the Honourable Lady's concerns, and I would encourage all members who want to put a spotlight on what is going on and to send a message to people who are struggling against a very repressive regime that we can apply for a debate in the usual way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the House may be aware that there have been almost 3,600 cases of monkeypox in the UK, one of the highest in Europe. Experts, including British Association for HIV and Sexual Health, Terence Higgins Trust, National AIDS Trust and Prepster, have said without urgent action, monkeypox could be endemic in the UK. The public health response has been far too slow from this government. Can we have an urgent statement from the government so that we can get a grip on this situation and ensure that no one is left behind?
Well, I shall certainly make sure that the Secretary of State for Health hears what the Honourable Lady has said. The government clearly has done some things to try and, in particular, raise awareness and give health advice on this matter. But I shall raise it with that relevant department and ask the new Secretary of State to get in touch with the Honourable Lady.
Chris Stevens.
Deputy Speaker, another couple of weeks have elapsed, so can I ask the Leader of the House when the government intends to lay down a second remedial order on bereavement support payments for cohabiting couples, given the courts decided 4 years ago these payments should happen, and will that remedial order be placed before recess tomorrow?
So I have raised this matter from memory with the relevant department, and I will follow that up and make sure that they're in touch with the Honourable Gentleman's office.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. Can I welcome the Leader of the House to her new position and urge her to use that position to secure a debate in government time on levelling up. It was the mantra of the previous administration, and those of us with local authorities that have bid for the latest round of the Levelling Up Fund, we're keen to be able to promote our schemes. I, in particular, want to promote Tameside Council's scheme for Denton. So can we get that chance?
Well, I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for doing precisely that this morning. He will know that the Prime Minister is still committed to this agenda, and he will have an opportunity tomorrow to raise any issues he wishes with the Chancellor, because clearly this is also about growth.
Alison Thulis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a survey by Child Poverty Action Group has found that scrapping the benefit cap is twice as popular as scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses. Axing the benefit cap, which has been frozen since 2016, would put an average of £65 per week in the pocket of families. Can we have a debate in government time on the importance of supporting struggling families in Glasgow Central, rather than the Tories helping their wealthy banker pals in the City of London?
Well, again, I would encourage the Honourable Lady to show up tomorrow and put questions directly to the Chancellor, but I would urge all honourable members not to get too excited about things they read in the press and wait till they hear what the Chancellor has to say.
Ergen.
A 1993 rule introduced by the then government said inheritance tax does not have to be paid on the transfer of assets from one sovereign to another. At the time, the then leader of the opposition, the late John Smith, asked, although it is accepted that assets held by the Queen as sovereign should not be liable to inheritance tax, will the Prime Minister explain why all private assets passing from one sovereign to the next should also be exempt? I think that this remains a legitimate question, so would the Leader of the House allow time for discussion on this matter?
Well, I think if the Honourable Gentleman would like to write to me with the specifics of what he is concerned about, I would be very happy to find the best way that we could raise this as an issue and give him some certainty so that he could apply for a debate.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Government's manifesto promoted levelling up, but now seems without a mandate to be pivoting their focus to trickle-down economics. Given the IMF has said that making the rich richer does not drive growth, and President Biden tweeted he was sick and tired of trickle-down economics, it has never worked. Can we have a debate on the utter failure of trickle-down economics favoured by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher?
Well, I would first of all point to the fact that our support package, 37 billion, to enable people to cope with the cost of living, could not be described as a trickle. In any respect. But I think that rather than a lot of commentary about economic plans, what the people of this country want to see is some action, and that is what they are going to get tomorrow, and I would encourage him to come to the House and listen to the Chancellor.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The sharp rise in short-term holiday lets over the last few years, and particularly the last few months, is fuelling the housing crisis in York, but also the cost of living crisis too. So could we have a debate in order to discuss the licensing which needs to be introduced to curb the industry and ensure that our constituents have the preference and access to housing?
I thank the Honourable Lady. I will certainly raise this with the relevant department, and when the next schedule of questions are published, I'd encourage her to come to the House and ask the Secretary of State.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, I welcome our confirmation that a statement on the UK's contribution to the Global Fund is going to be forthcoming. But I wonder if we could have a wider debate on UK aid spending, particularly the pressures on the budget, given the decision to go from 0.7 to 0.5%, and particularly how we can make sure that support for Ukraine is additional and not instead of existing aid plans.
Yeah. Again, he has an opportunity tomorrow to raise these issues directly with the Chancellor. We have had fairly recent debates around the aid budget, but I'm sure that when the announcement, which is imminent, for the Global Fund is made, there will be further opportunities to question ministers about that.
Christine Wakeford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Infield Centre Mental Health Unit in Prestwich, in my constituency, is due to be subject to a police investigation following a panorama investigation due to the mistreatment of patients. Following these devastating announcements, would the Leader of the House be able to arrange for either a statement from the Health Secretary or to be able to arrange for a meeting with me so I can discuss these concerns moving forward?
He raises a very important point. I know that the Department for Health and Social Care has done a lot of work in recent weeks with regard to making sure that care settings for individuals are appropriate for them, and clearly this is an immediate case for the Honourable Gentleman, and I would urge him to raise this directly with the Secretary of State, and I shall make sure she is aware of his concerns.
President Oswald.
September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and I'm grateful to members across the House who've signed my early day motion noting that. And it's unsurprising they've done so because this issue sadly affects every constituency in Scotland and across the UK. And while there have been improvements in outcomes for children with cancer, these have not been significant enough, and some treatments have not advanced in 40 years. Can I ask the Leader of the House, therefore, if we can have a debate in government time on how the UK Government can support the improvement in and increase in levels of research, and whether members across the House will support We're at Gold Day tomorrow to support Childhood Cancer Awareness Month?
Thank the Honourable Lady for raising awareness of that important day, and I'm sure all members of this House would want to support the aims which she sets out. The Government clearly has done a huge amount in terms of advancing partnerships in life science between academic institutes, but also the charitable sector as well, reforms on shared intellectual property, for example, and we will continue to do that as part of our growth plan.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the Right Honourable Lady to her new position and hope that the last few months of inertia will finally be behind us. Among the many important issues committed to in the Government's 2019 manifesto, but which we have seen scant sign of any progress on, is the long-promised employment bill. Can the Leader of the House therefore outline when we can expect to see this important legislation timetabled so we can end the race to the bottom in employment rights in this country, exacerbate exacerbated by our current economic crisis?
Well, I would first of all challenge what she says about this country's record on employment rights. We have tended to lead the world and certainly lead Europe with regard to that. I'd also challenge her description of a summer of inertia. The very fact that on the first occasion possible, we have brought forward measures on cost of living and tackling the cost of energy. She's shortly going to get a statement from the new Secretary of State for Health on our plans to assist health and social care, and also the plan for growth, which is being unveiled by the new Chancellor tomorrow. That has not just been pulled out of a hat. A huge amount of work has been done across the summer, including by the former Chancellor, the now Chancellor Duchy of Lancaster, and it will be announced in the normal way.
Well, I'd like to thank the Leader of the House for making time today to debate the situation in Ukraine. But in the last few weeks, we've seen escalation of military violence between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and also on the border between Kosovo and Serbia. We know that there has been some Russian involvement, although not directly, in these conflicts. Will the Leader of the House make time to debate wider conflict zones through Europe and Central Asia?
Well, I'm sure all honourable members will have been very disturbed by some of the reports of violence, but also violation of dead bodies, very, very horrific things. I shall certainly make sure that the FCDO are aware of members' concerns, and I would encourage him to put these questions directly to the new Foreign Secretary.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Verified videos by Human Rights Watch graphically illustrate the brutality and barbarism of Azerbaijan's recent attack on Armenia, showing an elderly Armenian civilian decapitated with a knife and his head mounted on the carcass of a pig, and the mutilated corpse of a female Armenian soldier with her eyes gouged out and replaced by stones. It should be noted, Azerbaijan is also backed heavily by NATO member Turkey, with one Turkish political leader stating last week, and I quote, "I remind you once again the Turkish nation has the power to erase Armenia from history and geography." So can we have an urgent debate in government time on illegal attacks by Azerbaijan on the democracy of Armenia, and a statement from the UK government condemning all those supporting these horrific actions and hate speech?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising, being the second member to raise these issues. I will certainly take this up with the new Foreign Secretary.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, the National Education Union and the Mirror have relaunched their No Child Left Behind campaign, which calls on urgent action for child poverty. So can the Leader of the House call on the Secretary of State for Education to roll out free universal school meals to at least all children in primary school to prevent children from going hungry?
Yeah. I will certainly raise what the honourable lady says with the new Secretary of State, and I would also encourage her to put those questions directly to him at the next round of questions.
Catherine West.
Deputy Speaker, in light of the Bank of England's statement this morning that interest rates are to go up again, and in light of food inflation going through the roof and the burgeoning government debt which is dragging us all down, will the Leader of the House make it a priority for us to debate in government time how we're going to pay this debt back? Will it be our grandchildren, or will it be the grandchildren of our grandchildren who will be able to pay back the enormous debts which this government is accruing this week in its decisions?
Well, the honourable lady will know that the Chancellor will be here tomorrow to take questions from all members in this House. But in addition to the very considerable support packages that have been put in place for both households and businesses, the answer to the problems she raises is about getting growth back into our economy. And that is what this government is going to be focused on, and what she will hear from the Chancellor tomorrow.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that the Leader of the House shares my appreciation and gratitude for the life of service given by Her late Majesty the Queen Elizabeth. She was a lady of great faith and who greatly respected other people of other faiths. Will the Leader of the House enable a statement on what our government plans to do for advances in the rights of freedom of religion or belief and the interconnectedness of freedom of religion or belief to all human rights and its relevance to foreign policy and trade?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this important matter. Yes, she was not just a beacon for that within the United Kingdom, but also throughout the Commonwealth and the wider world. And I shall certainly encourage the Foreign Secretary to get in touch with the honourable gentleman about how we can continue the work of our envoy that we have appointed on religious freedom and the other programmes that the FCDO is doing.
Barbara Ferrier.
Mr. Speaker, back in June, the leader's predecessor joined me in congratulating a teen boxer from Blantyre in my constituency. Will the new leader join me in congratulating young Jacob Naismith again after his historic win of the 46-kilo EUBC Schools Crown in Turkey this summer, making him the youngest competitor to ever do so? And can we have a debate in government time on the importance of local youth sporting groups in our communities across the UK?
Well, I'm delighted to be able to join the Honourable Lady in congratulating Jacob in his achievements in one of the toughest sports going. And I know that the new Secretary of State at DCMS is very passionate about the sporting agenda for particularly young people and children, and will want to ensure that we are building and bringing forward schemes to encourage physical activity and excellence in sport.
I thank the Leader of the House for answering the business questions. Statement, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Therese Coffey.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased today to set out to Parliament our plan for patients. As the Prime Minister said on the doorsteps of Downing Street, she has 3 clear priorities: growing the economy, tackling energy security and support for households and businesses, and the NHS, with patients being able to get